Good morning, everyone, again, and welcome to the Task Force on Children Sexual Assault Investigation Processes. Today is January 15th, and Happy New Year to everyone, which also happens to be Martin Luther King's birthday, although I know we'll be celebrating it on Monday. Glad to have everyone in the audience. And again, if you are in the audience and if you have a phone call, please step out to take your call. I'm going to ask everyone to place their phone on silence so that it does not interrupt the flow of the committee hearing. And if you would like to testify or share information, please fill out a white card and make sure that you give it to the sergeant at arms so that they can give those to me so that we can acknowledge you and make sure that your testimony is heard. We do have a pretty extensive agenda for today because there were a lot of items or issues that we talked about last meeting that we wanted to take up. And so we want to make sure that we do them as well as provide an opportunity for public testimony. I also serve on the Select Committee on Women and Children, which starts at 1 o'clock. So I will have a pretty hard stop for 1. But I do want to make sure that we cover and capture everyone that's here, making sure that everyone is heard. So we're going to kind of go in this order in terms of taking up and addressing some of the issues that were and have been actually brought up, not just in the last meeting, but in previous meetings. We're going to have the Department of Education to come and talk about their role with mandatory reporting. Then we want to hear from law enforcement, their role with child sexual assault investigations. And then we want to hear from the CACs, a discussion on their policies, because we know that there's not a level of continuity in terms of how they're all processed when there is a complaint, and we want to have a discussion about that. And then Ms. Audrey Wascom has some information she wants to provide to us, as well as some of the language and verbiage, because we're going to talk about our discussion in terms of what's going to be the recommendations for the 25 legislative session. So with that, that's kind of going to be the rough order of how everything is going to go today. Certainly, we're going to leave room for exceptions. And as we are receiving testimonies regarding situations involving our children and minors, I'm going to ask that you not disclose too much information about the particular case so that we do not jeopardize or disclose the integrity of the child, making sure that we keep them safe and making sure that we are not harming them in any way by having too much information disclosed about the particular case. However, we do want to hear about it, and if it's something that needs to be more elaborated on, it can be done with me where it's not publicly done, where this information can be picked up by anyone who's watching this televised meeting. So with that said, I'm going to ask if you would please call the roll.
Chairman Barrow.
Present.
Present. Ms. Brocksmith. Present. Judge Green. Judge Guillory. Ms. Hadley.
Present.
Dr. Hook.
Present.
Mr. Robinson. Honorable Russell.
Present.
Ms. Shelton.
Present.
Dr. St. Germain. Captain Songji. Dr. Thurber. Ms. Wascom. I'm sorry. Okay. Judge Wascom, sorry. And Judge Womble. All right, you have 10 present.
All right, great. All right, well, we are going to get started, and so we are going to start. And Judge, did you want to say something? I saw you pull your mic towards you, Wascom.
No, I was just moving it.
Okay, all right. Okay, great. So we're going to start with the Department of Education, if they would please come. And let me see here. Law enforcement. Okay, I don't have a card from you, Tony. Where's your sidekick?
What's that?
I said, where's your sidekick? Where's Ben?
Ben is.
Oh, hiding. I didn't see you. All right. If you would, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we're going to just kind of jump right on in to discuss the mandatory reporting process.
Sure. Good morning, Senator Barrow and committee members. My name is Tony Leggi. I serve as Executive Legal Counsel to the department, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I can start by giving you what I know. I've been with the department since last February, and I can give you the history of what I know of mandatory reporting as it has come through our department. If you'll remember, in the last legislative session, there was some clarification of the mandatory reporting law in the Children's Code. And prior to that, at the local level, there had been some different policies developed by the local school boards. When that was brought to our attention, Superintendent Brumley did request an attorney general opinion to try and have some authority to go to the local school systems and say, look, y'all need to have a unified authority or unified policy based upon the attorney general's opinion. Before the attorney general's opinion even came out, Representative Kim Carver, we sat down with him, and there was some clarification of mandatory reporting, the mandatory reporting provisions in the Children's Code, which is where we're at right now, and I think it was a good improvement. And we have since forwarded that to the local school systems, made them very aware that there had been a change in the mandatory reporting law in the Children's Code, and that's where we're at right now. The Bessie Bulletin has been revised to indicate that the acts that are addressed in the Children's Code should be reported to the appropriate officials. And with that, I can answer any questions with that after that overview.
So I'm going to ask a few questions, and I'm sure that there may be others. This actually went into effect, was it August, or did it go into effect for January?
I believe
That's
it
what I was
went
trying to
into
pull. I can't
effect
remember.
August. Yes, it went into effect in August.
Which is when school started.
Correct.
So tell me the process in terms of how all the schools are being notified. So I know that you guys are sending it to all of the local governance authorities, but how are we making sure that each school knows and that everybody in the system understands the new law?
Yes, we've sent out notices very early on after the statute was passed, indicating that people need to be aware of this, that it is going to go into effect in this coming school year, and basically notices relative to the training for mandatory reporters as well. So that was sent out by email. I'm sure it's been addressed in the various meetings that we have with the Superintendents Association, and whatever emails were going out at that particular point in time, I'm sure were very specific about that particular issue.
But is there any way for us to know for sure that all those individuals have received it and have ensured that they have gotten that communication over to each mandatory report, everybody that's responsible for being a mandatory reporter?
From the department's standpoint, I don't know that there's any way we can be sure that every school superintendent has gotten that issue and is implementing it. The issue really of the violation of this particular code really doesn't get to the department until it rises to the effect of
Right.
certification. And we have limited authority, you know, at the personnel level, at the local level relative to personnel, and it kind of is a gap there.
Yes, which gives me a little concern. So maybe we need to have the superintendent association to come so we can make sure that we have an assurance that this information is really being it's being followed, and that they're kind of making sure that those individuals understand the change, right, and what is expected.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about one of the situations that came up in the last meeting, and we may be able to explore it a little bit further. But it was regarding individual who we heard was able to leave one school who had been accused of assaulting a child in special ed. Special ed has been one of the issues that keeps popping up. It's been an issue that keeps popping up in terms of concerns relative to their safety and well-being, but they were able to leave that school and go to another school. And so kind of speak to that process if you can. And we can't go into too much details, but in terms of what typically happens when there is an accusation in a pending case, and how is it pursued to ensure that those who don't really have a voice really make sure that they're represented.
Right. Yeah, relative to, this would be a situation of staff misconduct, obviously, if a staff member, whether it be a teacher, certified teacher, whether it be a janitor, bus driver, whatever. And the Bessie Code, the Bessie Bulletin 502 relates to staff misconduct. And I'll just read you part of it. It says each LEA, prior to hiring any employee, shall require that the applicant for employment sign a statement providing for the disclosure of information by the applicant's current or previous employer, if such employer is an LEA, relative to all instances of sexual misconduct with students committed by the applicant, if any, in releasing the current or previous employer, if such employer is a city, parish, or the local public school board, and any school employee acting on behalf of such employer for any liability for providing that information. So that LEA that discharged that an employee who goes to another school has got to certify that whether there was any issue relative to sexual misconduct by that employee.
So if it is a pending case, and I'm just making an assumption because I don't know all of the particulars, but if that individual knew, if he or she knows how to maneuver through the process and was able to move fast enough before, I guess, anything could truly be on record or on file, then what is that process like? So is there once a person is hired, is there a review of their record annually, or is there anything that we ever look at? So once they come, because maybe, and I'm just saying, not necessarily the truth, but maybe they didn't know about the accusation. So how does that work if they don't know? Do we ever go back and take another look at someone's file or record? I'm just asking, and that may be asking a lot, but I'm just wondering because I'm trying to figure out what happened in that scenario, and I'm saying maybe they did not know, maybe it was not disclosed, maybe there was not even information that would have made them aware that this was even a pending situation. How do we capture, because there are some people who know how to manipulate,
Sure.
for lack of a better word, the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From a Department of Education perspective, we're really not involved in that process. And I really can't tell you how the locals deal with that, if they do some kind of periodic checks or what they do, because that's kind of outside the scope of our authority. Again, unless it comes to a certification issue.
Okay. Did anyone have any questions? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Shelton.
So if there's a disclosure, is there any process prohibiting the hire of that person? If they go to the new school, is there any process that prohibits it?
I think that basically is a decision of the local school. They would make that as a business decision that, again, the Department of Education is not involved in.
So it's their discretion?
Yeah, yeah. I would think that they'd be very leery if somebody had reported something that, in hiring that person.
Any other questions, Ms. Shelton?
No.
That's a little concerning. I mean, that could be subjective, right? And where there's a shortage across the board, I mean, like in literally every field, I don't know. That gives me a little pause for concern. I like to delve into that a little bit more because I don't know if that makes me comfortable, especially for children. So, because finding the individuals to actually work in that field is challenging enough. Then they themselves have their own challenge in terms of being able to communicate or verbalize, oftentimes, what is happening. And I hope that we're not creating the perfect storm where if I'm have a shortage, this may be a little questionable, but maybe it's not too bad, right? Depending on how it's encased or how it's written, how it looks. Then we take a chance, and then I'm not sure if I just you guys don't really get involved in it, and there's nothing there's no level of continuity across the board in terms of how it's all reviewed.
And I think the issue that had come up before Representative Carver amended the mandatory reporter statute clearly indicates that you can have differences between different LEAs. They have their own attorneys, and they kind of make up their own policies at that level. So again, that was a frustration to us, and that was the reason why we went and asked for the Attorney General opinion to provide to the school systems. But Representative Carver's amendment took care of that prior to the Attorney General opinion. And again, that's been disseminated among the different school systems. So, and look, you and I, and probably every member of this board, faced with that type of situation, would err on the side of caution, right? But there could be an outlier.
Yes, and I'm always concerned about rural areas more in particular because the challenge is just so much more difficult for so many different layers, right? Okay. This is definitely causing me to have a few more concerns and to raise a few more questions. And I feel like now we're going to have to go a little bit further down because the other part for me is communication, because the communication has gone out from you guys through emails for the most part.
We think we've raised it to the point where we've done our due diligence in communicating the issue.
Tell me again how it's been communicated.
It's, well, you have the monthly superintendent's advisory committee meeting. We've communicated at that. We've communicated it through email, through various disseminations of the bulletin, which was amended after Representative Carver's legislation passed. So there's been quite a lot out there. I'm sure it's been discussed at other type of confabs that go on throughout the year. So verbally, in writing, at superintendent association meetings, we've tried to do our best. Like I said, we think we've done our due diligence in communicating that the caution that should be used with that issue.
Okay. Again, it just kind of caused me to have a few more questions. Communication sometimes becomes a real challenge and barrier. Again, some folks have more access than others to receive information or to get information, as opposed to some may not. But okay, all right. I don't see it. Yes, Dr. Hook.
You may not be able to answer, but are you aware of any oversight of mandatory reporter training for any of the school employees?
The mandatory reporter training takes place at the local level again. We have advised the school systems that mandatory reporting should be a part of their program.
And what happened?
And if I'm an employee of a school and I am told that if I am classified as a mandatory reporter and I don't report and I am subject to criminal prosecution, I'm going to make darn good and well sure that I know what the parameters are and what my obligations are. So hopefully that isn't a hard sell among the school systems and the law enforcement authorities. I think DCFS also notifies teachers as well. So the word is out there.
I think for the most part, especially I think in bigger areas or in your suburban and your urban areas, you may have a little bit more. But I'm just always really concerned about rural areas. And you, when you asked that question, it made me think about just the certification process. So in the certification process, do they sign off to all the things that they have received and that they adhere and understand?
Yes. Yes. And obviously we do background checks as well. So if there's anything going on, we will find out about it.
Okay. Dr. Hook, any other questions? Okay, thank you. All right, then. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. St. Germain. I'm sorry.
Two concerns that I have. One is that every day I hear principals who do not report sexual abuse of their children. So we know that that is continuing. So that's one concern. The second thing is a suggestion, and I'm not sure where this may be placed, is that we have a nationally adopted program through ABSAC, which is for the professionals who care for children of abuse, and it's called Darkness to Light. That is one program that a teacher, a school employee, a parent, whatever, should never be alone ever with a child. And so if you're the parent picking up your children after school activities, and there's only one child left, you stay with that child until the other parent comes. So there's never an opportunity for someone to be grooming children or to be alone with a child, because we hear every day on the news how school employees are having sex with children. And so we have to be stronger in that prevention message, as well as mandatorily training and requiring mandatory reporting training at the very minimum, and following up that those guidelines are met.
Dr. St. Germain, what was the very first thing that you said when you first started talking? You say, what about the teachers? Or you say principals? What did you say?
I get that every day. I take care of children at a child advocacy center. And when we hear from parents and children who, well, I told my teacher told the principal, my principal never reported it. It's that ongoing, if you have a suspicion, it gets reported. Not that there are facts, you don't have to be the fact finder. A suspicion gets reported.
Well,
And it just continues every day. And I'm in one parish.
sure. Well, my thought on that is, again, if you are classified as a mandatory reporter and you don't report it, you are subject to criminal prosecution. So if it rises to that extent, I think somebody needs to go to law enforcement and indicate that there is mandatory reporter who did not report. And I think that would send a clear message across the system if there was a prosecution on that basis. Since I've only been with the department for a short period of time, so I have not heard of any prosecutions under current law or former law, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm sure there may have been, but I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Ms. Hadley.
I know at the local level, in order for advocacy centers, because I work in one in Northwest Louisiana, we have to go through the school board to be approved to go into the schools to provide education, whether that's body safety for children or education for faculty on mandated reporting, human trafficking, all those things. Do you have any authority of what can be approved to provide education in the schools? Because I think the issue we face at a RCAC level is to some rural areas, we're new, we're different, they haven't heard of us very well or not as much, and so they're very leery about letting us go into the schools to provide that education. Because we try to offer mandated reporter training as well to keep everyone relevant and up to speed as much as we can in our community, but we do get some pushback on what schools approve us to go in. Is there any authority on your side to allow that to be a lot more mainstream?
Yeah, we don't have that authority. All we can tell a school is you need to comply with the statute that requires mandatory reporting, and how the instruction takes place, the content of it, we don't have any authority to dictate that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hadley. Ms. Wascom, this is definitely not giving me a good feel. Sorry.
I really just need clarification. If there is a report made and an employee, and I'm going to include Title IX reports as well. If a report is made and that said employee that the report's made against resigns in lieu of punishment, who does the school, like, is there a repository for the state, for LDOE, to receive those reports?
No.
Okay. So someone can just jump from parish to parish and sign that paper stating, and y'all have no oversight of that?
We don't have any oversight over it. Like I said, the only time it would come in, be an issue would be relative to if it was a teacher certification process. But somebody like a janitor, bus driver, somebody who does work at the school.
I mean, I'm just going to say, like, just teachers. Like, let's just say there's a teacher here and there is a report made, and the teacher resigns and moves. Where does that report live? So the parish or the school doesn't have to report it to a state agency?
The hiring school, if they were moving on to a new school, then that statement would have to be provided to the new school in conjunction with the employment process.
So, okay, going back to my initial question when I asked you about the process. So take me down, if it's a teacher and they leave before there's any conviction or anything, or if they found not guilty, then that goes with them. So wherever they go, this information will follow them. But if they're not a teacher, if they're any other part of their profession, if they do anything else, because there's no certification for those individuals, then that information does not follow them?
You mean the statement?
The statement, yeah, I'm sorry, the statement.
That I am not sure of, to be perfectly honest with you.
So going back to, because you brought up a question that I really should have followed up on a little bit further in terms of the repository. And if there's any, like, when the report is done, does that information lives anywhere? You can come on up and join him. You can fill out the card later.
Good morning. I'm Ashley Townsend with the Department of Education. We actually just recently added to policy the requirement for LEAs to notify LDOE when an employee resigns in lieu of termination. There's not an action that we can take on a certificate prior to a conviction, but we did find it useful to have a way to know when this kind of situation is happening. So that was just added to policy. It became final in October.
So when you say added to the policy, what does that look like?
So the text in Bulletin 746 reads, an LEA must notify the LDOE upon the termination, resignation, or resignation in lieu of termination of an employee who holds a Louisiana educator credential within 10 days of separation of service when the action results from conviction or plea of nolo for an offense outlined in 15587.1 or for a felony or for investigation and report of test irregularity. So it doesn't extend to something that might be considered an employee misconduct that isn't covered by one of those other items. So it's limited, but this is a way for us to be notified whenever that resignation occurs.
So there is a repository of some type, and so when you guys receive it, what happens?
So I don't know that we've received any yet. Again, this has
Okay.
just been in place since the end of October.
Okay. So I guess hypothetically, how would it operate? So you guys will receive it. If someone tries to go to another location, what would happen?
So really the individual, and Tony can correct me if I'm wrong, the individual has to allow their new employer to receive that information. And so the new employer, in doing that due diligence, should reach out to previous employers to see if there's been an issue. Also, those new employers are required to do criminal background checks. And so as the requester of that criminal background check, that new employer would receive the ratbacks that occur when an arrest is made. And so they would be notified in that way if that type of incident occurs.
Okay.
But if there's an active investigation, let's say something happens in May, and they resign, and they move, and they get hired on in another parish. If an investigation drags on for a year, and this is just going to fall through the cracks, if that same teacher is hired on at another place, let's say that they're, maybe they plead guilty with no jail time, how will the school be notified? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, if there's an investigation and it's not in a timely manner, or there are delays, what is the responsibility of LDOE in that situation?
So LDOE, and so this was legislation from 2022 that now we're in the process of getting those updated educator criminal background checks. And that went into effect January 1st of this year. And so LDOE will receive ratbacks on criminal background checks that we've processed. There are some that we already had, so we'll get ratbacks from those criminal background checks as well. Also, the LEAs are required to notify us when there's a conviction. If there's a conviction for certain crimes, then LDOE suspends the certificate, and then that goes to Bessie to take a further action like revocation, et cetera. So, and again, that extends to felonies and to those certain crimes in 15587.1.
And so if an LEA decides not to prosecute because they don't have enough evidence, like let's say it's a smaller child, there's no recourse.
It's my understanding that at this time, there's not an action Bessie can take if there's not a conviction.
So what bothers me a little bit more is the situation that we were shared in the last committee hearing. And as I'm listening to the process, I'm trying to figure out what transpired in that situation. And maybe because we don't have enough information, we can't, it's not giving me any comfort, but it certainly is giving me a lot more pause for concern as it relates to DOE's responsibility and how they are engaging, especially with children, younger children or children with disabilities who cannot and maybe cannot disclose clear enough what has transpired with them. I'm still struggling. I'm trying to give the benefit, but I'm still struggling. Like this person left one school, went to another school, was hired, and we don't know the context in terms of what the charges were. We don't know. We assuming that there was no conviction. I would absolutely assume that there was no conviction, because otherwise that's going to cause a real big issue. But how can we kind of shore up and make sure that we don't have any level of gaps? What more maybe can you guys do? And I'm not taxing or trying to look for you guys to have to do more, but the safety of our children is preeminent. I mean, we have to make sure that our kids, especially the ones who are most vulnerable, are safe.
I think another important distinction too, and Tony may want to add, is that our action is limited to educators that are certified. So there are lots of school employees that don't require certification, and we can't intervene in any way in employment or hiring or personnel matters. So there's not only not a way for us to know about issues or incidents with employees that aren't certified, there's not anything that we can intervene in the actual employment of those people.
So we have teachers that are not certified, right?
Yes, ma'am. There are some. Now, educators are, they need to be certified. There are some, well, with the exception of charter schools in which they have the autonomy.
So do
to
they not
hire.
fall under that rule?
Mandatory reporter, they do. And we actually just
Okay.
added all the mandatory reporter policy to the charter bulletin as well, and communicated that out with them. And we communicated that out. We release an acts of note document every year following legislative session, and we curate that list for system leaders because, there are a couple of hundred legislative acts that happen, and so we curate those down to a list that they need to be sure to pay attention to and take some action on. And so this was one of the acts that was on our acts of note list that went out to school districts. We also recorded a video webinar that went through several acts that we wanted to make sure to call their attention to, and this was one of the ones we included there because we wanted to make sure they knew they may need to update their local policy to bring it into alignment with the new legislation. We also included this in our legislative report that was at our Superintendent's Advisory Council meeting in August of last year.
Okay. Ms. Shelton.
Follow-up questions. For the mandatory reporter training and the change in the law, your role was just to make sure the schools were aware of it, and then there is nobody to make sure that they're doing it. That's on them?
Right, the employers are required to offer it,
Okay. So you just
but there's no
tell them of
reporting that
rep-
comes back to us about
So you don't know
whether-
if they did it?
Right,
Okay. And there's nowhere to maintain that information that they've done it?
that's not a required report at this time.
Okay. And then, if I'm understanding this right, it's up to the teacher to self-report when they go to a new school that there was an issue at a prior school, and that school's obligation is to check with that prior school.
It's more like the teacher has to agree for their new school to ask their old school for information about anything that may have happened. So it's not that, and the educator should self-report, especially if there's a crime and an arrest, a conviction, et
You
cetera,
said they should
report.
self-report?
The educator has to sign off that the schools can exchange that information.
Oh, okay.
And so the new employer would ask the old employer if anything had happened.
But they do have to self-report. They have to say there was an issue at my prior school. If they don't tell the new employer that, there's no database or anywhere they can go look to find out if there's been a prior issue.
And it's an issue as much as, say, the employer can ask the former employer if there was an issue.
Well, again, the provision is in Section 502 of the Bulletin, School Administrator's Bulletin, and it says, prior to hiring any employee, an LEA shall require. So if I'm the hiring entity, I can require that the employee get the to-be employee get a statement from the prior school, which would indicate the reason for discharge.
they could just say, there's a gap in I wasn't working. They have to tell them. There's nowhere they can go look and see it, where they were employed prior.
It would take due diligence on the part of the hiring entity, the hiring school system, to do some research, which I believe they would probably do, but no assurances of anything these days, I guess.
I did want to point out to your question earlier that current Bessie policy does prohibit the closed doors with one educator and one student, except for a couple of exceptions for special services provided for students with special needs or counselors or psychologists or things like that. But policy does prohibit that closed door with one adult, one child.
Tell me your name again.
Ashley Townsend.
Okay, Ashley, please fill out the card for us. Ashley and my friend, my former colleague, as you listen to us, do you hear some of the things that can be concerns?
Sure, and
Yes.
we are in tune with your concerns. We are happy to sit down with you at any time to help you develop any sort of legislation that you deem necessary. I think your idea of going down the chain and talking to more people probably would be very helpful to this task force's goals. And we'll be happy to be involved anytime along the way and provide input for y'all.
Yes, and I'm also going to challenge you guys to think of maybe some things that you could perhaps do as well that may not really require or it may not be very taxing to have those little things added, but it would provide more of assurance, because there needs to be some way where there's something that comes back that we know that people has A, received the information, and B, they are acclimated to what is required or expected of them. Certainly, we're going to have bad characters in every situation, but we need to make sure that they have it, and that cannot be utilized. The mere fact that when Dr. St. Germain just said that we hear every day where someone is not reporting, that is concerning. And I know it's concerning to you guys as well. So how is that happening? And if you guys are not getting a report, then that's even more problematic.
Well, let me say this. Dr. St. Germain's example really doesn't tell us whether the person was a prior offender or not, so that this reporting from one school to another would have alleviated that. Again, I would just relate back to the fact that if there is evidence that somebody breached the mandatory reporter statute, that'd be brought to the local law enforcement for prosecution.
And that's something we're going to talk to Mr. Sanjay about, because, sometimes there needs to be examples, and then people really understand the seriousness. I mean, 'cause you could hear it, right, sometimes, and it does not just kind of like resonate, or it doesn't really click until you see the actual presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Shelton, that was it? Okay. All right. I don't think we have any other questions. So I'm going to ask you guys to come back. So what I think is going to happen, we may have one more hearing before the session starts, but I'm certainly preparing to actually carry forth this task force into after session, because there have been things that like this that has developed that we did not expect, that I know that we need to go a little bit further down, because I need to have a better level of assurance of what is happening and making sure that the law that we pass is really being adhered to. Because unfortunately, you know this, Tony, we have passed a lot of great laws that are not being actually followed. And I want to make sure that especially as it relates to our children, we are doing everything possible to ensure that they're okay.
Oh, I know how you are, Senator, and you know you can reach me anytime, and
Yes, sir.
be happy to discuss it with you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Ashley.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any additional questions for them, and so we are now going to move to law enforcement investigations on child assault. So is that going to come from you, Mr. Sanjay? Okay. All right, we're just going to turn you on and let you go. Okay. You on.
Okay. I mean, I guess I gave all my my policies to y'all, and I guess I would just turn it straight over for any questions or anything anybody has.
We need you to kind of give us an overview. You know, we just got them.
I mean, you talking about to the process itself?
Yeah, just kind of run through just some basic things because we know that every law enforcement system is not following what you guys have here.
Well, I mean, if we get a case that comes to either whether it's the schools, teachers, whether it's parents and everything, we have a pretty good rapport with our school system and all that stuff. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen because schools are big, you know, but we have a pretty good rapport with them, and I'm receiving, to my knowledge, we're getting a lot of cases from them, whether it's home teachers, this and that. We haven't missed a beat there so far. But as far as the processing goes, it's different per every case that we get, because I mean, if something's going on at a school. Or if something happened a year ago or 6 months ago, or I've worked them where they occurred 10, 15 years ago, depending on the, prosecution end of it and all that stuff, So a lot of them differ in day-to-day, whatever we get in. So the procedure itself, like an overall step-by-step guide, is hard to just sit down and say. But, I mean, if we get a case that comes to us, every sexual abuse case for us, children and adult, because the sexual assault in our policy 603, that's adults and juveniles. I just wanted to put it in there so we weren't missing anything when we were going through it. As far as we go, we get the case. Sometimes we get called out to the hospitals. Sometimes we get called out directly to the schools. My first and foremost thing is to make sure that child is safe. That's it for me, as far as I'm concerned. And then we kind of go from there. We do a type of interview, if possible. If she's at the hospital or he's at the hospital already, sometimes that's hard to do. The medical exam and the safety of that child is more important than my pre-interview. But if we go to the schools or we get a report in, we'll do a small interview just to kind of get the ball rolling. And then from there, we'll set up things with the CACs. We'll do medicals, depending on, like I said, it kind of wraps around depending on how the scenario goes.
So kind of give me a little bit more as it relates to if this is an assault or an alleged assault with a student with a disability or one of our special needs students who may be challenged in terms of being able to communicate, who's all in the room, how quickly normally does this happen? So from the time that it's reported, how long does it take for you guys to begin to activate?
It like I said, it depends. Like if it was just a report that was filed to a deputy and that they don't call us out on, it'll be the next day, the next working day, that we'll get the report. If it's at a school and they call us up with a disabled child or whatever, it's pretty much right then and there. No matter what time, whatever, we're there. We work 24 hours a day for the most part, so we just roll around. But who's there with you? It kind of depends on the kid and on the situation. So it's kind of I don't want to say a roll of the dice, but it kind of is. I would like to have, first of all, if it's a special needs child, somebody that special needs child trusts. If it, most places and times it's either a parent or a teacher or somebody that's there with them all the time. So you kind of got to figure that out as you go, you know what I'm saying, when it comes to a special needs child. And then the CAC, we'll get with them sometimes, and they'll either do it themselves or bring in somebody that's, different, that can handle certain situations better. And then, and we kind of just go from there with those. It's just, it's nothing's put in stone on that.
Okay. So this is what you guys do. How, and I know you can't speak to everybody, so how can we have some level of continuity with the procedural process?
I mean, like I said, this is our policy. I do not know what other departments do. I know, like, in our area, we have Gonzales Police Department, and they're pretty much do the same stuff that we do. I'm not going to say they do everything 100%, but we work with them quite often. In the most parishes that I've been to and have to work cases in, Lafourche, I've worked them in St. John Parish and some Jefferson Parish and stuff like that. We've all pretty much been on the same page on how we work and share information and all that stuff. Those going up north and all, I don't have too much information on those departments up that way.
So in some of the rural areas, which I often go back to, because I do have concerns about those areas, and a lot of times they are challenged, right, financially in terms of how many people they actually have there that can actually work, because this takes on a whole new life of its own, right? So when it comes down to the association, and so you or represent the association, yes. So tell us about what the association require at this point. Like, what training are you guys just receiving across the board with all departments?
Well, the LSA puts down, we got to have so many hours, but that's a total, not all pertaining to this. That's a, gunfire and some basic things and all that kind of stuff. But that, as far as the sexual assault and child abuse investigation stuff, I'd have to find out if that is actually required through LSA. I don't know if it is or not. My guys, and I know some, I see a lot of guys from different parishes. I know Jefferson's big into it. I see St. John, St. James, and all, in my area. Personally, my guys go to, I wrote some things down. We go to a lot of stuff, basic sexual investigations.
But you guys choose to go, right? And are there costs associated with that as well?
Yes, ma'am.
So then that becomes another challenge.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I'm gonna be honest with you, sexual assault, child abuse investigations, it is hard to find good classes. It surprises me, but it's hard,
Nationally, even? I mean, just across the board?
They do have them. I'm not gonna say that they don't. You gotta kind of find what kind of fits you. But we have, as a whole, I would say that they're not abundantly just out there as much. They do have them. I have some coming to Ascension in the next couple months. A guy from the Memphis area does some stuff for us. He does it for St. Charles as well.
Okay. So one last question that I have, and then we're going to turn it over to anyone else who have questions. Are there any, I guess, national trends or models that we could follow that could maybe make us or get us better in tune with what's happening across the board?
I'm not. I don't know of any currently. Excuse me. I don't know of any currently.
Okay.
But I'm sure they're out there.
Okay. Okay. Miss Hadley. Wait a minute. Hold on. I'm gonna have to do. How you do the ad? Okay, hold up. Here we go.
You are familiar with NCJTC, that training. I know they do a lot of sexual assault trainings on there. I just wasn't sure if you were connected with that. But
Again,
they do quite a few. I know they do webinars and a few
And that's what I'm
Travel.
seeing the trend going to is the webinar stuff.
Yeah, sadly.
I'm a face-to-face kind of guy, you know what I'm saying?
I hear you.
But yes, we're we're doing some of those as well. My guys are. I know Gonzalez in my area is doing them as well. A lot of the stuff, I think, like the Senator said, is out of the state, the better stuff. Because, like, I mean, I've been doing this for a little over 21 years now, just child abuse stuff. Going to the same classes, and you find out that they're teaching the same things. And it's kind of like, I've been 3 times type of thing, so I'm not gaining anything out of it.
Yeah.
So it's hard to find that extra stuff that can bring us to a different level. And I'm a person where, hey, if I'm not doing something or there's a better way to do it, let's go find out and let's get it done. You know, that's the way my department kind of rolls with and I go with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're out there, but they're hard to, you know, some of them teaching the same things. So you're trying to find different aspects to everything.
Yeah, and I know Crimes Against Children, their annual conference in August, they tend to try to add new things as well, and they have some great case
And
reviews.
and again, even with a parish, and we're not a big parish, and I don't know our financials, but from what I hear in my conversations, we're all right. But it's still hard sometimes to send a lot of guys to one conference.
For sure.
But I'm sending 2 this year today.
Good, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I do have a couple questions.
Okay.
And I know I can only pick off of just your area,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
so, but I'm also just would love to have some insight to how I can also communicate back to our area in Northwest Louisiana. I know you just mentioned that you do pre-interviews to kind of get the ball rolling. Help me understand what kind of questions is it that you ask, and how do you know when to stop to where you feel like you have enough to then refer it to ACAC?
It's a difficult thing, I guess, on, you know, because as a police officer, I want it all, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, again, it's about the kid, it's the children, it's not about me and this and that. We'll just try to, sometimes it's just a general question, you know, kind of like CAC interviews kind of do, just like, hey, can you tell me why you're here and what's going on? And usually we do not press at all. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And I'm talking about depending on what they say or conversate back, it might be 1 or 2 questions, it might be 1 or 2 minutes, and it's done.
And I know you're seasoned and have been in the field for a little while. How do you, I guess, help the young ones, the ones that had just got hired onto that role? How do you help them know how far is too far?
Well, first, it's training. My guys don't go out on their own to a sexual abuse case until we're kind of comfortable. There's a certain point, you know, and a lot of it is, you know, is the right person. You gotta have the right people, you know. Everybody's running through issues about hiring. Nobody wants to do this job anymore, type of thing. And I've been shorthanded. It's nobody's fault. It's just the way it goes. And I passed up on a guy or 2 just because we weren't comfortable. You know? So it's a lot of it's about getting the right person and the mindset, and then just going through the training. So my guys go through their regular FTO training when they're on the road, and that's just how to become a police officer. And then from there, when they come up to my department, we go through another FTO process. And just certain schools are mandatory, and just interviewing skills and this and that, and we go from there with it. But yes, they have at least, I'm not going to say I'm there, but my lieutenant or my staff sergeant is there, and they kind of just learn to go and not to press the issue too much. And then, again, they spend a lot of time with the CAC. So my guys, when they're also going through their time, we don't just say, go to a CAC and just observe. Go spend a day with them. Find out what's going on, you know what I'm saying, the whole background to it. So we'll do stuff like that and just kind of.
Yeah. And the last question, the biggest thing we see working at a CAC is the challenge of communication amongst agencies, to kind of revert back to last meeting as well. when it comes to you receiving the report first, what's your timeline, or what's it like to then forward that information to DCFS as well? And how do you guys, I guess, pros and cons of communications on y'all's end?
I mean, if it's a in-home perpetrator and stuff like that, which is the stuff that DCFS is going to take, it's pretty immediate. Normally, it doesn't even make it to us in our area. Children's Hospital in Baton Rouge is where we pretty much do everything at, or our school system. They beat me to the punch half the time. They're on the phone with them, and they're reporting it already to DCFS and all that stuff. We'll confirm with them that they've done it, with DCFS, not just with whoever said they were going to report it, but usually it's immediate most of the time. There are some cases that it might be the next morning or, so forth.
Do you see it challenging on y'all's end to report that to DCFS, or is it just pretty policy that, like, we're doing it no matter what, regardless of what we think the outcome of it will be, if they accept it or not? Do you just do you report all of it?
All of it. I mean, I can't report half and, pick and choose type of thing.
Right.
So, no, we report everything that we have to report to DCFS. Because I work more than just this, too, so that's my mind, But, yes, we report everything that is mandated and has to be reported to DCFS, we report. Okay. The only challenge for us, and it's just, I've been doing it a long time. I said, back in the day, it was just, hey, call DCFS. You had a rapport with the workers a little bit more, and it was just this and that. Now it's 45 minutes on a computer, which kind of stumbles us a little bit when we're doing stuff, but part of the process.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm gonna follow up a little bit on that. So once you guys report to DCFS and kind of like handed it off, right? So you guys are, no? So y'all don't just hand it off and
We give them the information, but we're still working our case.
you still working your case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you guys are still on track doing your part while they're doing their part. Do y'all ever intercede again or intersect again, maybe?
Well, my guys will talk to the DCFS
Okay.
workers quite often.
Okay.
But yes, it's a separate investigation. We'll feed each other as needed on information. But it's
Okay.
definitely a total I mean, look, we've had conversations with DCFS where it was like, they think we should do this or we think they should do this, and back and forth. Both of us have policies and rules and laws that we have to abide by. But the information is given to both parties. They give us everything, sometimes more than I want, but we get a lot,
Okay.
from them as well.
And so normally you guys have a good working relationship. It just kind of slows down a little bit because of the computer not being able to necessarily talk to a person. Is that what I'm hearing all the time? Yeah.
It's
Okay.
just stopping, you're in the middle of your investigation and you got to stop. And my guys are telling me that it takes them, 45 minutes to kind of go through the process on it and all that stuff. But I mean, it has to be done. So it just gets done.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. I don't see any additional questions. Thank you, Ms. Hadley. Ms. Shelton. Okay.
Thank you. Just so I'm understanding clearly, like I read your policies and they're good. You have good policies in place of that you have to have specially trained interviewer and that you don't want to interview the child in the home or place where the abuse took place. But is there no oversight to assure that all law enforcement agencies have these type of policies that you're aware of?
No, I don't think it exists.
You don't have to report, yes, we have this. We have this. You don't have to report that to anyone. It's just what your
This is just
organization-
us.
Okay.
We have it's a process where it kind of automatically happens on our policy. It's a company, and anytime there's an update or anything like that, then it goes down to, we have a group that oversees our policy.
Okay.
Full-time, matter of fact, 2 of them, and then they make changes as needed to fit what our department wants to happen.
But you don't know if every department has that? Okay.
I would have to probably tell you no.
Okay. And then the last question I had is, do you have any data collection for tracking sexual abuse children investigations, how many you've conducted and outcomes? Do you guys track that at all?
I would have that. It would
You'd
take
have
me a
that
while to put it.
information?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would have. I would just have how many cases, sexual abuse cases. I break them down yearly, every
Okay.
year. So I would be able to break them down into not down to just child abuse, maybe rape cases, this and that, and it would, I would have that yearly.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Something we might be interested in. Thank you. That's my question.
Problem.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shelton. I have you, Miss Russell. Get ready. I'm coming to you now. Are we-
Okay.
Okay, good.
And I don't know if this will make you feel a little bit better, Senator, but, so a lot of training is done for your prosecutors. And one of the key things to make sure that we have successful prosecution is that our prosecutors work with law enforcement. So I can speak for Lafourche, and I can probably speak for most district attorneys' offices. We train oftentimes our investigators on what we need to have successful prosecution, how to testify. We tell them what we need for successful prosecution, because I think prosecutors and investigators want the same end result. I don't like pre-interviews. I really despise a pre-interview. I'm so sorry. We don't require initial disclosures. So when we go into our advocacy center interview, they could be exploratory. We don't need an initial disclosure from law enforcement, so I'm not a fan of it, but everybody does it differently. But know that our MOUs that are set up between our advocacy centers, our district attorney's office, our law enforcement, set up the protocols that everybody needs to follow. So no one should have any question about what they need to do to get that child to an advocacy center. And the advocacy centers are the vehicle or the vessel that requires and mandates that everybody talk. Because generally speaking, there is a lack of communication in the initial stages. But our advocacy centers force people to sit at the table and speak. And so where we have these issues with sharing of information with DCF and law enforcement and where they don't disagree, when they come to the table in an advocacy center, there's your vehicle for everyone to speak and share information. So, I feel bad for areas that don't have it. But if you want to see it successfully done, go to any place that has an advocacy center. Speak to the prosecutor, speak to your director, speak to your forensic interviewer, and that's where you're going to see success, I think, in prosecution.
So that sounds so good, Madam DA. But
Want to come to Lafourche and see one?
and you guys probably do an excellent job. But what about the areas that don't? So then that becomes the bigger issue, which is what my concern. What I keep going back to, and even though you guys may be considered rural, but I guarantee you, because I know some of the folks that have come from that area, I'm sure that you guys do a great job.
But we can do it for the areas that don't have it. So Assumption Parish doesn't have one. We offer our services. We'll work out an agreement whether they pay or whether they can, it's okay. But our forensic interviewer will do those interviews for Assumption. So pretty much every area that doesn't have one can look to their neighbor and see if they can work an agreement out. So you don't have to have one in every single parish.
So they need to ask, though.
Communication again, and it can be done. It easily can be done.
So just hypothetically, do you think that is actually? Do you think they're asking? Do you think maybe sometimes they just so overwhelmed? I'm gonna try to give everybody a benefit of the doubt. Okay, I'm just gonna try to err on the side of saying people just don't have time. They haven't thought about it. Whatever. How can we help to, I guess, bridge that gap a little bit better?
I think sometimes it's transportation. I mean, our law enforcement officers certainly have a lot to do, and so for them to transport that child and go there, it might take them hours to do so, depending on location. So that may be part of the issue in some areas. Some areas, I just think it's a matter of educating them on our advocacy centers and how amazing they are. And once we do that, I think law enforcement agencies will start using them more.
Okay, I think you're right about that, but we definitely need to do that. Dr. St. Germain.
So you answered or discussed some of what I wanted to say is from a medical standpoint, I believe every child in this state deserves a CAC. And I would not be short of saying it should be mandated. That is something that every parish in the state should be connected with. And most of them are. Because that is your wraparound services. Those are your multidisciplinary teams. We sit every other Friday together as law enforcement partners, advocacy, forensic interviewers, medical personnel. It is the one-stop shop for children and families, and it should be mandated across the state, across this nation, in my opinion. One thing I do want to kind of talk about a gap that I've seen is that I go out on acute cases all hours of the night. My CACs are refusing to even get that paperwork to see what my photos look like sometimes. And so that we need to make sure that we need to investigate. Have they been to a hospital before going to a CAC? If so, who's the keeper of those records? So for some who don't know, those medical records that are held in the hospital do not include the forensic records. Those are kept by whatever entity collected them and then will distribute to all the MDT partners. For some reason, though, that particular CAC does not want the initial records. So that should be something that's comprehensive for a child. A lot of times we get parents that ask for those records to bring them with them to the CAC, which we're more than happy to give. The other thing I want to say is I wish every agency had these, followed these. These are superb. Thank you very much for bringing them. And then I just want to say, everybody thinks human trafficking happens in foreign countries, in big cities. Do you guys have training, and do you see kids being trafficked? Because we do, by their parents and whomever. Jesus.
I don't know if I'm on or not, but I am. I've seen it before in my career. I'm not going to say that I haven't. We haven't had a lot of it, and lately, let's say that. Usually, I work with the FBI, AG's office, and everything, and we've done a handful of them, but we haven't seen a lot of it. I would say in the past 6-7 years. We get some reports of it, and it's more sexual abuse stuff. Some of the stuff that we get from the Fusion Center and stuff like that, but we haven't seen a lot of it at all.
I failed to do this early on. We have Jim Kraft here from the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement and Ruther Chatwood. If y'all would come to the table, please, and just add anything else that needs to be added. We would definitely want to make sure that we ask you to come forth and share any additional information that we may be missing. And I'm sorry that I failed to do this early on, but we definitely want to make sure that we bring you to the table. And some of the things that we've already asked, maybe you want to add clarity to those things. And as you guys are getting settled, I'm going to go to Ms. Hadley for her question. Wait a minute, I did that wrong.
I mean, at this time, it's really not so much of a question as more as just a statement that with our CACs in the rural areas, we try to cover all the parishes throughout the state. And for our parish, we are based out of Caddo, but we cover 9 parishes total. And so as a CAC, we're trying to do our due diligence to knock on the doors of our rural areas and community partners to let them know our services. And I think it's already been said as well, the tricky thing is transportation, the drive to it. But we do our best to make those connections and bridge those gaps. And as far as for medical stuff, a lot of time we are not the investigators. And we want to know what has happened. We would like to hear about that, but we also want to protect ourselves as well. If I don't have to see that to still get what I need or just to hear this child out, I can still do that without having to see pictures. But we also do our due diligence to make sure we get those medical records because we have a national database that we have to report our stats to. So we collect from law enforcement what their case outcomes were. We collect from DCFS what their case outcomes were. We want to see how many medicals were done for these children, and if there hasn't been one, we're getting with our MD team, like, let's get one scheduled. Why have we not gone to our specialized pediatric sexual abuse doctor? Like, let's do this. And so we try to do our due diligence to make sure we're providing all the services necessary for that child. And as far as just collecting the medical, there are some CACs that have medical on site to where we have that collected in our database. And there are some that we work closely with medical to at least gather that information and make sure it is being done. And if not, we're going to go to our detectives or DCFS and let's schedule something because I see that that's missing for that child. So we're trying our very best to make sure we stay on top of the services for that child and the families, as well as making sure we're all keeping ourselves accountable and staying true to what we're doing to make sure we're providing for the families.
And I guess I don't want to go too far into you guys because y'all have y'all presentation, but I'm wondering, how often do y'all have, resistance? Or, because one of the things I think I heard you say, Madam DA, is asking, right? And so are they asking, or are you receiving or, experiencing resistance in some areas, maybe?
It's been a slow process.
Okay.
But we have, in our area, we have experienced stronger connections in our rural areas that they've used us more than they have in the last 20, 15 years. So we see progress, but it can be slow at times, depending.
Okay, all right. Captain Sanjay, thank you for your presentation. Now we're going to go to Mr. Kraft. Thank you so much. And Ms. Chatwood, if you would, please, if there's anything that y'all would like to add and kind of share with me what it is that this particular commission does as well.
Yeah, Jim Kraft, Executive Director of the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement. We basically follow the statute, Article 533, which says that the commission will assist law enforcement and prosecutorial agencies in the development of programs, resources, expertise which promote detection and prosecution of offenders committing crimes of sexual abuse against children. And so we're in more of a supporting role, which includes financial support. We award grants. A portion of our VOCA grant is awarded annually for distribution to agencies. I'll give you an example. The October 2019 to September 2020 reporting period, we funded victims of child abuse with about $18,198,000. So it's generally about, it was designed to have about 10% of our VOCA funding going to these agencies who are doing these cases and investigation and dealing with victims. But we funded at between 25 and 28% of our VOCA funds.
Each year.
Each year.
So this is going to the CACs and who else?
What else does that go to?
Goes to law enforcement,
Law enforcement, okay.
district attorneys, prosecutors, courts, and other governmental agencies, and other nonprofits as well, not just CACs.
Okay.
And, Senator, I'm sure you're aware of it or heard that VOCA funding all across the United States has been severely reduced.
Yes, that's cool.
We lost $8 million. We were funded last year at $18 million. We were reduced to 10 this year. So there's a lot less money, but whatever our amount is, generally 25 to 28% of those funds will go to these different groups who are doing this work.
Okay.
Yeah, I printed out the last 5 years if you'd like to have a copy.
Yes, I would. I definitely would like to have.
Number, if you like.
Yeah, this is a summary of all those reports.
That's great.
You can have this right here.
And
This
you
is
can
the
have
whole
this
thing.
too, and that's all those reports. It shows how the VOCA dollars are spent in each state.
Good. That I was hoping I was going to ask that question. So what I will do is give everybody an opportunity to process all of this information, and we may ask you guys to come back if we want to delve a little bit further into it. Maybe not before session starts, but in our next term, after session, when we reauthorize this commission to go forward, we'll delve a little bit further in there in terms of seeing how the money is actually being appropriated, to the parishes. Oh, that's good. That's it here?
Yeah, that's part of that.
Okay.
It just shows you
Yeah,
our
can you
total
make sure-
awards.
Okay, great. Well, this certainly will answer a lot of the questions that I have, and so I'm not going to belabor the issue any further since we just received this, but I definitely would ask you guys to please make yourself available to come back so that we can kind of delve a little bit deeper into this to see how the money is being utilized to some degree, making sure that it's serving the purpose that we intended to do, right? And I'm sure that you guys are following up with each entity. Okay. All right. Well, great. Anything else?
Questions, Madam Chair, if anybody
Okay, we
has
have
any?
one question here now, I think. Ms. Shelton?
Yes, just a quick question, and perhaps we follow up at the next meeting. But you discussed the duties under Article 533 of the Children's Code, but I'm looking at Article 531, the Children's Advocacy Clearinghouse, which states that the Law Enforcement Commission creates that. I couldn't find any. Is there a clearinghouse?
No,
Is that in
we never
existence?
did establish a clearinghouse after communicating with district attorneys
Okay.
and sheriffs in each parish. They wanted to store that data, and we didn't have, at the time when this was done, of course, I wasn't with the agency back then.
Yeah, I was agree.
But it was done back in 2003 or 2004, and at that time, we didn't have sufficient staff or any way to set up some of those clearinghouses.
Okay.
I know for like our peace officer standards and training program, we have a statewide database that tracks, problem officers or officers who hopscotch from one agency to another because they got in trouble and so they left, they resigned before they were fired. And so we have that database that we maintain, but we don't run the clearinghouse for these cases.
Okay. So perhaps something this task force could look into would be getting that established and.
That could be a recommendation. Of course, we would
Okay.
need the necessary funding.
Okay.
Because we don't have any external funding sources that we could establish that with, now that VOCA has just been decimated.
Well, we couldn't use that
So,
money for that either.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to use those federal funds to set that up.
But I think that you're onto something that we certainly need to take a look at because, that was almost 20 years ago, right?
It was,
Yeah,
and I think the reason that in the 2003 legislation, there was legislation in 2004 as well, and they struck through everything dealing with commission on law enforcement and put that on that responsibility on the judicial districts, the district attorneys, and the sheriffs. And I think that was to give the local authorities more control over what kind of programs they wanted to set up, what kind. And so it was changed in 2004, and then we ended up being in these three articles at the end of 531 through 533.
Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Shelton, did you, yeah.
Raise something to look into.
After receiving this information where we can kind of go through and see how everybody is doing it, it may actually lead to whether or not that's something we need to revisit. Okay. All right. Thank you so very much. I appreciate you guys coming and being with us today, and I will ask that you will please come back so that you can give us a little bit more depth.
Yes, Ms. Trapp has my contact information.
Yes, they have done such a wonderful job in making sure that we really kind of run this task force effectively and efficiently and keeping us on track. Okay, thank you so much, and y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay, now it's time for our CACs to come forth and provide us with some information. And as it relates to procedurally how things are done with their office. And we've kind of delved a little bit into it. And I see Miss Monica in the audience. I don't know if you're going to join us at the table or not. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, ladies, let me find your card.
I am Crystal Mitchell, Executive Director for the Louisiana Alliance of Children's Advocacy Centers, and I have with me Ms. Diana Singleton. She is our Program Director.
Ms. Diane, if you will, please fill out a white card.
All right, so much has been said about child advocacy centers, and I will just say thank you so much to Ms. Hatley for serving on this task force and being able to educate all the members on the amazing work that the CACs provide across the state. And then also I do want to apologize for not being able to be here for the last meeting, as I had a board meeting on that same day, so I apologize about that. Anyhow, I do want to just kind of give everyone a quick, and you all should have some information about child advocacy centers in front of you. So, of course, we have 14 CACs across the state that are providing services to the children and families in their various communities. Of the 14, we have 11 who are accredited through National Children's Alliance. This means that they have 10 rigorous standards that they have to abide by to make sure that they're providing quality services to these children and families in their communities. With that, we also have 3 who are working towards accreditation. That means that we are working alongside them, providing them the support that they need to make sure that they're being able to achieve those standards, and of course that they're implementing best practices in their areas that they serve as well. With that, I think, I'm not sure, like I said, I'm trying to catch up with all the things that have kind of been shared, but I do think it's important that we kind of talk about the intent of the CAC model and why we utilize it, right? The CAC model was actually formed back in 1985 by Mr. Bud Kramer. He was a district attorney in Huntsville, Alabama, and he just came up with this idea of this being truly a victim-centered approach, making sure that the kids are at the forefront, and of course that all of these service providers are providing these quality services to make sure that when we meet and that when we come together, everything that is discussed, of course, is in the best interest of the children that we are served at the CAC. With that, and I know that we were kind of talking a little bit about the interview process and things of that nature. So, of course, we want to make sure that those kids are being seen at a child advocacy center, that they are not being questioned or maybe at the school or at their home where the perpetrator is, things of that nature. We want to make sure that we have this safe location for them to disclose to trained forensic interviewers. The interviewers have to go through a 24-hour training, but then also twice per year, they also have to attend peer reviews. This, of course, is with their peers, that they kind of discuss any cases that they may have. And then also, they have to have at least 8 hours of training every 2 years. So that is the mandate on just the forensic interviewers. And then, of course, if we go into the other disciplines within the CAC, of course, they have also mandates through NCA. With that, whenever law enforcement or DCFS do have a case where it's a referral that comes in through their system, the first thing, of course, that they will do, I know a lot of times they may go and do a soft interview. This means that they will have minimum facts questions that they will ask the child. No more than 5 questions. It will be the who, what, when, where, how. Hopefully not the how, but maybe who, what, when, and where. That's what we are hoping just to get, so that some of the CACs do require that there is an initial disclosure in order for them to conduct a forensic interview. And then also others, then, if there's just an allegation, automatically, let's go ahead, get that forensic interview scheduled so that we can see that child in a timely manner. So that's basically how it goes when it comes to the referrals. And I also want to say this: in order for the CAC to receive any referrals, of course, that has to come from either law enforcement or the Department of Child and Family Services. We can't provide any services outside of that because, of course, we're not an investigative agency, right? We're providing that support to that child, we're providing the services to that child, but we have to receive those referrals in. So then also, I talked a little bit about the CAC model, and of course, the CAC model, it really promotes that there be a joint investigation between law enforcement and the Department of Child and Family Services. We want to make sure that both of those agencies are working together to minimize the trauma on that child. We want to make sure that they have an opportunity to collaborate, and then of course, we know with these cases, there's not a lot of evidence, right? And so anytime that we can get those kids to come into the CAC, and then of course have those agencies to work together, the better outcome for those children and families that are seen at the CACs. So of course, have the kids to come to the CAC, and then they're offered not only a forensic interview, but victim advocacy services. That means from the time that they walk into that center until the time that they leave, or the time that that case has gone through the judicial process, they have an advocate working on their behalf. They're keeping them abreast of what's going on with their case and providing them any resources or things of that nature that they may need. Not only to that child, but then also to those non-offending caregivers and any siblings that they may have as well. Then also they're provided, of course, mental health services, the medical exams, and then any other services. Of course, the biggest piece is that multidisciplinary response to child abuse cases. I know I've heard from y'all's last meeting that y'all talked a lot about MDT, and so the multidisciplinary team definitely is the heartbeat, I say all the time, the heartbeat of the CAC. We can't work without our partners. It doesn't work without us really being able to come together and work and really figure out what's on the best interest of the kids. With that said, all of the CACs have to meet at least monthly. Now, we do have some areas that maybe meet twice per month, and then also may have a meeting just specifically for maybe a case or things of that nature, but they do have to, at minimum, meet once per month.
Before you go a little bit further, so with this meeting that is done monthly, it's done with whom in conjunction with?
Yes, so that's the CACs, of course, your law enforcement, your DCFS, maybe that's your investigators or the workers that's on the different cases, medical providers, your mental health providers, as well as your victim advocates, and of course the DA's office. So when they're meeting, they're discussing all of the cases that comes through the CAC to make sure that we're able to provide, the best outcome for this child. And, the outcome can look differently for each child, right? It could be that we're going to prosecution with one child, but it could be that a child is maybe fearful to testify. So what does that look like? There may be a plea deal or things of that nature. So it definitely looks different for each case. However, that's the time in which everyone kind of comes together, talk, and figure out what's going to be in the best interest of that child. And then, of course, maybe if the child is being seen for therapeutic services, then is that therapists will be able to provide the team more information about how the child is coping, things of that nature.
So are these meetings in person or are they?
It varies.
Okay.
I would love for them all to be in person. However, of course, since COVID, that has kind of, put up. It's kind of placed the people in a place where they would like to have some of the meetings held virtually. It's more convenient, right? So some of them are held in person, and then some of them are virtual.
So do any of the CACs have challenges in terms of getting all those parties to come together?
Yes, ma'am, you know it.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Now, and I always say I think it's important, even though we do have a protocol that's in place, right, for each CAC, and however, just getting everyone to the table at the same time, and of course with their different schedules and things of that nature, then that definitely is a barrier. I can say that several of the centers have expressed that they maybe can't get either law enforcement or either DCFS to the table or other partners, and so I think that piece just kind of goes to education and really helping even the new members, because of course there's so much turnover, right? And so I think maybe quarterly I've shared this with several of our CAC directors and our MDT facilitators, as well as our regional care coordinators, is key for us to at least quarterly be able to train our partners on the CAC model, on the importance of these meetings and their role and responsibility as it relates to the law and what they're supposed to do when it comes to these cases.
So will there be any improprieties for us to see maybe the last 6 months of each one of the CACs and who's attended? Like, do y'all have the records?
Yes, ma'am.
So
Everyone that
so
you
we
have a
can,
sign-in
so
sheet.
I would like to, I would like to personally see
Okay.
the level of continuity or consistency with the meetings and who's in attendance.
Okay.
To see if there is some level of commonality in terms of what we may be seeing, and then figure out why.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, we can definitely provide that to you.
Okay, hold on for a second. Ms. Hadley.
Not only does LACAC keep us accountable as CACs to see who is coming and try to get the ones that we're lacking to come, we also have to, our accountability also lies with our national database as well. We always get reviewed every so often, every few years, and they also like to see the numbers of who attends. So we get the double the accountability to make sure if we see where we're not working, where LACAC is on us, as well as our national database is on us to make sure, like, let's make sure we get prosecution here. Let's make sure we have DCFS here. So there's double the amount to make sure that we try to get as much of our MDT there as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Hook? Let's see. Add.
Sorry. I know that you said that you had stakeholders participating in the meetings. Would it be more effective, do you think, if you had the caseworker for each case, or if you had a representative? Like, what would work best?
We would love to have the caseworkers, because of course they have the most up-to-date information. They're working hand in hand with, the victims, and so they know more information to be able to share with the team. I do know that that's definitely a challenge, because of course they have so many cases that they're dealing with on a daily basis as well, but that's definitely something that we encourage. However, what we've seen is in some instances where we'll have maybe the supervisors who may have been providing an update, and so of course they'll be able to share that information with the team. But it's nothing like having the workers, right? So that we can get the most up-to-date information.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hook. Okay, you can proceed with your testimony. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I really wanted to stop there because I didn't want to lose my train of thought.
Yes, ma'am. And I know I can talk fast, so definitely kind of slow me down some if I need to. Then also, I think I just kind of gave you all an update about all of the referrals that are seen at the CACs. And I do want to say this, some agencies also are able to, refer a kid to the Child Advocacy Center, whether that's FINS, which is Families in Need of Services, whether that's your local district attorney offices, your judges. However, there does need to be an investigator there at those, in order for those interviews to be conducted. And so, of course, we definitely make sure that even though that there may be, asking for a forensic interview or either asking for the kids to have additional information provided, we still want to make sure that they are, it's an investigative agency that's present in order for there to be an interview conducted at all. So I think I kind of gave a pretty good overview, and I know that you heard from Ms. Rutha and her team about some of the issues when it comes to VOCA, but I definitely want to kind of shed a light on this piece as well when it comes to the issues that the CACs are facing. And I'll just say we are actually still collecting the data from last year. Actually, today they're supposed to, it's their deadline to submit all of their data from last year. However, in 2023, we served over 7,000 kids, 7,593, I believe, to be exact. And then, of course, that number is steadily growing. The need is there. However, we are mandated in the Children's Code to exist. We're mandated to provide these services, but of course, this definitely, all of the CACs, or the majority of our CACs, are NGOs, right? And so they have to rely on grant funding, and they also have to rely on, any fundraisers or things of that nature. And so that can look different, from those centers who are in urban communities and then whether those in the rural areas, right? And so with that, I was actually in a meeting yesterday, and y'all, I get so emotional when I hear about what these centers are going through every day. But just yesterday, I was talking with the director, and she just told me, listen, I'm at the point where I know I'm going to have to cut the staff. I don't know which one. because there are now 40 to 52% cuts when it comes to VOCA. And it's no fault of LCLE, right? And we definitely appreciate their partnership. However, it's definitely because of, a federal cut. And so we, of course, are working with the National Children's Alliance, who's the accrediting body for all CACs at the federal level, to try to work alongside our congressmen there to really, enact some change there. However, on the local level, this is what our CACs are dealing with. One of our CACs have now had to close 2 of their satellite offices because of the cuts. So that means now more kids are having to travel 1.5 to 2 hours to a CAC to receive services.
Which one is that?
That is the CAC Hearts of Hope in Lafayette.
Lafayette.
Yes.
Okay.
And so when you think about, like I said, the challenges, and you think about, like, we've done so much, to make sure that we're expanding into those rural areas. And now when we're facing these, cuts each and every quarter, it seems like, at this point, it's like we do need some support. I do ask for this group, as far as one of your recommendations, if you would consider some funding for the Child Advocacy Centers right now. And I do have something in here that kind of gives you an overview of the history of state funding for CACs. Last year, of course, for the past 3 years, we've been included in the budget for $1.5 million. But that's $1.5 million to be dispersed amongst 14 different centers. And so what that's looking like specifically on the ground is maybe, one center receiving $100,000. And if we think about that, what is that equating to? And so those are some of the issues that we're dealing with across the state. And so, like I said, we've asked for $3 million to kind of offset when it comes to the VOCA cuts. And so, like I said, that's one of the things that I think is definitely needed. And I know that the CACs would definitely appreciate it, because now, like I said, that they're at the point now where they're either having to close doors, they're having to lay off staff members, and then, of course, the need is there. We need, the services that are provided at CACs. So, I would just open the floor if y'all have any questions for me.
Don't see any questions, but so prior to becoming the pro tem, I served on finance.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I would remember you guys coming before us, and I always, was always extremely supportive of the organization, not that I understand everything that you guys do, but I have a better understanding since we started the task force, in being able to hear, especially from Ms. Hadley, a lot more in terms of what's happening on the ground. I have more of an appreciation for the work that you guys do. As I'm looking at your funding source, you talked about grants.
Yes.
So there's a straight line item allocation that we do, right, from the state, but there's no dedicated funding, right?
Yes, ma'am.
There is dedicated funding?
Yeah, it's just specific. So it's from the governors. It's in House Bill 1 usually, and it's specifically for CAC's Child Advocacy Center.
But that's the allocation
House
that we
Bill
get.
1,
But
yes,
it's not so there's no dedicated funding stream
no,
to you
ma'am.
guys.
I'm sorry, no.
It's just what we allocate, which has
Yes.
been pretty standard
Yes.
throughout the years. It's really not really going up. And I remember you guys coming and fighting. I mean, like literally, I think literally every year. Yeah. I'm gonna leave it at that. So I'm gonna be looking at, and I'm gonna ask Monica. I'm looking at you, Monica, to help me. We're gonna try to see if we can find a dedicated funding stream, because unfortunately, I wish this was not the case. The numbers are, I think, getting higher.
Yes.
And maybe part of that is because people are understanding, and there's more awareness, right? And now people now going like, oh, we can't do this to children, right, Captain Sonia? and other folks are saying, no, we're going to hold you accountable if you do this to children, and we're going to report you.
Yeah.
So maybe, and so we need to make sure that the resources are in place to assist.
Yes. Well, thank
Okay.
you. We definitely appreciate that.
And I see Monica's come to the table. Before you say something, I'm going to ask Ms. Shelton. She has her button lit. And I see you, Dr. Thunder. I'm not going to let you get away. Thurberg, get away from us. Okay, Dr. Shelton. Let me see if I do this correctly. Add Shelton.
There it. As far as what you receive, what is allocated to the LACAC versus the 14
Right,
individual?
so LACAC does retain 10%
Okay.
of it, and so that's $150,000 a year.
Okay.
And then, of course, that's to support us being able to travel and do the different trainings that we provide across the state.
And then how do you decide? Is it by
It's a-
staff number,
No, it's a
population
funding
served
formula. Mhm, so
for
it's a-
each individual CAC that is distributed?
So it's a funding source, so it's based on three things: child population,
Okay.
accreditation status with NCA. Well, actually, it's only two things. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Those two. Yeah.
Those two things?
Uh-huh.
Okay. That was my only question.
Okay.
And I can provide to you the funding formula just so that you can see for each of the CACs if there's something
Yeah,
that would be helpful.
That would be helpful.
I'll email it to the to you, Ms. Anna.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Thurberg.
Yes, thank you. In interviewing children, the question often begins with whether or not the child understands the difference between truth-telling and lying. I'm wondering if you have a standardized question that you ask children in this regard.
So all of the forensic interviewers actually, like I said, they go through that 24-hour training. And so it's National Children's Advocacy Centers, that's NCAC. Some of them are trained through APSAC, and then some of them are trained through RADAR. So there's three different modalities that they could kind of utilize when it comes to training. And it kind of, each of them also kind of have a way in which the interviewers are building rapport with the kids, right? And so they're giving them an opportunity, and they kind of ask questions in a way in which it's not, closed questions. It really opens up, and so they're able to kind of really expound and, go into detail about anything that they needed to share when it comes to the allegations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Ms. Hadley. Oh, well.
And just to go off of that question, a lot of how our forensic interviews work, it's not scripted.
Yeah.
It is a guided protocol that we follow. And so as we continue our education, our questions can evolve. And so I know a big topic when we go over our rules or our guidelines in the room, they have varied. And so it's the truth or lie question is always tricky, especially with our younger ones. But we try to come across in their child developmentally way, like whether they're 3 years old, how we can go over that. And they've even at that point, 5 and under, there's certain trainings where we're just kind of meeting the child 5 years of age or under and meeting them where they're at without necessarily going over those guidelines. And that can just be due to their age development, their attention span. And so a lot of our trainings evolve around psychology, scientific approaches, even with any kind of questioning type training. So they do evolve, and we try to meet the child where they're at their age or where their mental disabilities may be at. So that can vary greatly, but we understand that's a challenging question.
We're going to make you lie. Okay. There you are.
So this is my area of research. So there isn't a emerging database for children under the age of 5. And it's a very strong literature. It's something we might want to go into later. But among other things, if you avoid asking anything about lying behavior, okay, that seems to be very important. And if you get a child under the age of 5 to pledge to tell the truth, okay, in both the laboratory research and in forensic settings, they will tell the truth. And you get very reliable data from children, even at the age of 3 in this regard. So this is something we might want to discuss.
I would absolutely love that because it fascinates me and challenges me on the daily with how I interview preschool age and we could always use the resources.
All right, great. Well, I tell you, now that excites me because we know that we are making these connections on things that are very, very important that maybe would not have happened had this task force not exist. And so with that being said, Ms. Taylor, I'm going to ask you to kind of wrap up this part of the meeting because we're going to look for some dedicated funding for this group.
So, Monica Taylor, Director of Governor's Office of Human Trafficking Prevention. I work closely with LACAC, DCFS, law enforcement, prosecutors, all the criminal justice system. So, just want to say we have put the 1.5 in the governor's budget, so we'll be in the budget that he presents. Additionally to that, we have tried over the years and will continue to try to use different types of grant funding that we apply for to help provide additional funding to the CAC, specifically on human trafficking. But one of the things that we are looking at, and I don't have any answers yet, about some dedicated fund. I welcome having that longer conversation with you. But one of the things that I think is so important for everybody to realize is not only the CACs, but the child advocacy centers, the sexual assault centers, and the domestic violence centers. These 3 NGOs are critical in keeping victims in the criminal justice system. We talk about criminal justice so much, and I know that we're talking about these organizations because we want the children to be raised healthy, happy, and whole. But one of the other things is that we need to put perpetrators in jail. And these entities, these NGOs are critical when it comes to keeping victims within the criminal justice system. They stay in the criminal justice system longer when they have the support of the NGOs. And we have to do a better job on a state and federal level and a local level of funding these NGOs because they are critical to our criminal justice system.
I totally agree with you. I just want I know that some of the fees that are assessed to certain things, a lot of that is already encumbered. But I want to take another look at and see if there's something that we can find that can have a little bit more continuity because with each change of administration, it's always a risk, right? And so we cannot afford to allow the balls to fall in this area. I mean, even more importantly, I've always been a big supporter, but now I have a better appreciation.
And we are working, the governor's office is working to try and see what there is there that can be done.
Okay.
So I'm happy to work with you on that.
Okay, you have no choice. I'm going to recruit you. Okay, Ms. Shelton?
Yes, I just had a quick question on the referrals. You said, law enforcement agencies or DCFS. Is it or? Like, do all of the CACs accept from both, or does some only accept from law enforcement?
They all accept from both. However, like I said, about that joint investigation, we want to make sure at least law enforcement is there as well. So DCFS can always, refer as well, but we want to make sure that we have both agencies there to promote, like I said, that joint investigation.
So you need a representative from law enforcement and DCFS. It's a CI investigator.
We would like that. So now sometimes you have where, there maybe law enforcement can't come, or either maybe DCFS can't come, but the interviewers will make sure that a copy of the forensic interview is shared with whatever agency could not be in attendance, or either they can make provisions for them to come to the CAC to view the forensic interview so that they can have the information they need for their cases.
So if DCFS needs to get a child interviewed and they can't get a hold of law enforcement for whatever reason, they can still give a referral at all of the CACs?
Yes, they can refer at each of the CACs. I asked them they sent me a list of that. So they.
Okay. Can you just give us that information of what?
All of the CACs are able to see them. Yep.
Either they don't require both. They just.
No.
Okay. Okay. We've got a different report on that, but I'll look into that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very good question, too. Okay, all right. So I think that concludes our testimony with you guys. And it's almost 10 minutes after 12, and so I'm going to have a hard stop at 1. So I want to make sure we do our public testimony. But Mr. Matlock, which he walked out. Did you want to come? Okay, you want to see where he is? Okay. While we are waiting on him, let me just make this quick announcement for all of you who are here. I just want to say thank you so much for your engagement and commitment to this issue and the task force. And so, because we're going to go a little bit beyond lunch, there is lunch in the back. So if you want to just step out and grab something to eat, and when you finish eating, come back in, please feel free to do so, because you may not have an opportunity when you leave here before going to your job to eat. So we just have a list something if you would like to step out and grab something to eat right quick, because we're going to continue to keep working right on through. So I don't see that Miss Matlack has come in. I remember I see all of you ladies. I know this is all DCFS here on the back wall. Is there anything that y'all wanted to present or say from the last meeting? You have something to say, I can tell. Yes. Your face looks like it. Your face is defying your body.
My teachers used to ask me, are you understanding?
Okay. If not, then we're going to go ahead and hear from all of the individuals here who would like to speak from the public. So I see my good friend here, Mr. Richard Ducote, Jan Pradet, Roger Williams. Y'all want to come on up to the table? Okay, so just have a seat right there. We got Miss Wascom, since you were right there. Do you want to kind of go through your memo right quick for us? Thank you so much, Ms. Wascom. Oh, Lord. Okay. Okay.
You're fine. And I'm not going to take forever. I'm going to actually do an addendum to this. I don't know if y'all have had the opportunity to read through this. But there's some outstanding conversations I'm going to have with DCFS and some counselors in the future. But I wanted to go back at the last meeting. At the last hearing, I talked about changing the words invalid and valid to verified and unable to verify. So survivor-centered language is, my passion, and how that affects children long-term. And so in the Forms 471, the valid letter, it states, we did not find sufficient information to support a finding of abuse or neglect. Actually, let me back up just a second, just for the record, so everybody knows what I'm talking about. So this is a memo on changing possible language so that it's more survivor-centered for long-term outcomes, better outcomes for the children. And continuity of language and communications. So this came about when I think all of us in this room, we've been doing this a very long time, and it's easy to forget that people that are outside of this world have a different understanding of certain words. And so, as I said last time, the dictionary, and I'm just going to read it again for the record, says the word invalid means not valid, not founded in truth, fact, or logic, and hence weak or indefensible. Synonyms are false, untrue, bad, and wrong. And so if you look at it from a point that these letters are being used in family court hearings for custody issues, and we are encouraging children to disclose to a safe adult, if a child doesn't feel believed, that can have dire outcomes. So when I started, that was my initial, like, let's change, this is an easy fix, let's do that. I compared it to the children's code. As I said last time, these are procedural language, it is not a legal one. But also it's inconsistent with what the DCFS website actually states is invalid. So on their website, it states that the agency has determined that the abuse or neglect did not occur. So there are inconsistencies depending on if someone went to seek more information. And again, like if this is a 6-page report, I think that these are very easily, fixed. It just, adding it into the day. But there are 2 things that I wanted to talk about that I didn't last time. And one of those was the DCF website itself on how to report abuse and the difficulty. So I timed it from like the landing page for myself, and I know what I'm looking for. If I am trying to navigate the DCF website to report abuse, where would I call? Other than the line at the top with the 1-800 number, it took me 7 minutes. And so pages 2 through, 5, I took screen grabs just so you could see, and that there's inconsistency in the information tabs. One of the things that I think everyone in this room can agree that there's a lot of confusion on what juvenile sex trafficking actually looks like. I think the general public struggles to understand what the difference is. And on the DCF website, it has a tab for juvenile sex trafficking reporting. It does not have one separate for child sexual abuse. And I really had to dig to, everything was just, it just says child abuse or neglect. So I really had to dig and go drop down to find what they consider child sexual abuse. So I feel like that's an easy thing. Like, there can be crossover on the tabs, but just so that if someone doesn't know what they're looking for, or they're maybe confused on like, does this fit? They have access to that. And I think with everybody's short-term memory, like short attention spans now, it's like the faster they can get to this information, the better. So I've been having conversations with DCFS about the language in the letters. We all agree that this is something that can be done. But in doing this research, I started having conversations with counselors and therapists, licensed social workers, and I've specifically had conversations with clinicians that only deal with, or their majority of their clients are child sexual abuse. And so on page 5 of my report, I list the 3 questions that I ask. So I want to make sure that I'm asking consistent questions so that, they're not just all over the place. So my questions are, have you had any clients under your care whose parent or adult received an invalid letter? If so, how have the children responded to an invalid letter? And do you have thoughts on long-term outcomes of children whose parent or adult received an invalid letter? And it was, I think that we all know that there's long-term outcomes, but to actually hear this from the clinicians was really eye-opening for me. I have several outstanding conversations or individuals in the room. I've told them we're gonna talk about the language, but it brought up a couple of points about the mandatory reporter portal. It's not that easy to use. It's very frustrating for clinicians. But I wanted to note, I put this in my report, and then I have a couple other things I wrote down. But if a child receives or the offender receives an invalid letter, and the child has disclosed, to the clinician, and the clinician is also a mandated reporter, that child no longer feels that they can trust the clinician to disclose, because they've done what they were asked, right? They disclosed the information, they trusted the adults in the room, and now they've come back, and depending on who the other parent is or the other guardian, they might feel that they're branded a liar. And so there is a breakdown of trust in the most sacred relationship, for healing for them. And then, a couple of the things I think too, a comment that was made to me late yesterday afternoon by a counselor was that the invalid letter also affects the clinician if they are the one that is doing a mandatory report of their client, that they take an oath to do no harm. And so if they know that there's most likely not going to be evidence because it's a delayed disclosure, and they have a pretty good idea of how the outcome is going to be if the child is not believed. And I think that's something else that we can take into account. And then some other things that I think that we can do with the language is that, and I would love to hear some feedback on this, via email or conversation later, on resources that are given after an invalid letter is sent. So there's no follow-up. And so it goes back to the explanation and consistency that this might not necessarily mean that we're saying it didn't occur. We're saying that that we can't meet the level of proof. And so the feedback that I've gotten from the clinicians has been that even if they know that, like, okay, this is not going to meet the burden of proof, at least they feel believed. And if there's some explanation for that somewhere on the website, would be good and helpful. So, but I will send an addendum with additional, after I do my interviews and I've had time to talk to DCFS.
I'm going to add Dr. Hook so that we can have back and forth dialogue among each other. But let me first say thank you so much for taking this on, bringing it up. I remember in our very first meeting, and it was like a aha moment, right? In terms of the importance of that and what words could do, and then in terms of invalidation, what does that mean? But I'm going to have to tell you, when you said to go look at the website, it wasn't easy to navigate. When I pulled up, and let me tell you what I put in for my search: child abuse reporting. That's what I typed in. Let me tell you what came up. Because I didn't hear anything else after you said that, because I was just in awe. So, Dr. Hook, somebody is going to have to explain why this information is so old and dated. And I want to know, and I'm saying this right now publicly, who is in charge of our website, and I want to know how they're being paid, because this is absolutely so unacceptable.
And in defense of DCFS,
No, you can try to defend them. I'm not talking
No,
about
no,
that per se. I'm talking about how old this information is. We have Governor Bobby Jindal executive order. We have something else from 2012. Nothing is current.
So I have had a conversation, Dr. Hook's been a part of this, and someone else that's not here, at DCFS higher up, just on like, what is if I sat down with y'all and we're like, hey, this is the easy fix on the back end to fix, they were very willing. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we can have a game plan.
And that's one of the things I looked to come out of this. But in doing that, when you said to pull that up, this is what came up. Governor Bobby Jindal, 2011. Reminds child reporting laws, hotline news. I'm telling you, I'm furious because I'm like, why is this here? And I'm not going to even go down the rabbit hole about how much money we have spent in terms of the whole computer system. I can't even think of the right word right now. How much money I was told when I was on finance we spent for this, and this information is way too outdated. So who is maintaining the website?
Well, we do have a meeting actually to discuss some of the things that you brought up with the website. We do agree that mandatory reporting, the portal, may be more difficult to find than it should be. And so we are going to make some changes, and we're going to look at, we're not waiting for the task force to make that recommendation. Everything that is in the memo today, we're ready to move forward with and look at and see how we can address it now. Really everything that we've heard about in the task force, if there's a way for us to move forward and make those changes, we are not waiting for that recommendation to come out. We are meeting about it, and we're trying to figure out how can we make this happen. Maybe not tomorrow, but as soon as possible. I think we have a meeting scheduled on the 30th, So we're going to have that discussion. And what we would hope to come out of that meeting is when we come back for our next task force meeting, we're able then to say what we agreed upon and what the term should be for our letters. Now, in order for us to keep it consistent with the children's code, then we would have to make more of a legislative ask. And I do think that is a recommendation that potentially should come from the task force, is making sure that our language is consistent across the board. I think it's very confusing for stakeholders and then also for families when there is different language that's used, and we would like to see, some consistent use of language.
And I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I don't want to come off this way, but I am still very upset about this information. And I want somebody to tell me, and if you can't tell me right now, this minute, but I want to know today, who is maintaining this website? And why is this information so dated? Now you're going to make me really kind of go through the whole website, because when I looked at it the last time, the information I looked for was current. But when I typed up that information, just because I was trying to find the report I was trying to, then this is what came up. And we talking about a governor more than a decade ago.
I can't see what you're looking at, but Lauren, is that on our actual website, the information that Senator Barrow is looking at?
Yeah,
It's like
it is.
like
So
a
it's
link,
Oh,
like a
oh yeah,
hyperlink?
it's on your
So
website.
she typed it in, and so it's pulling up all of the.
It's from the search bar.
So it's pulling up information from the search bar.
From typing in child abuse reporting.
But how many governors we've had since then? I'm just saying. Okay, I'm going to get off of that. I do want to know that information. I want to know how much money is being spent on whoever's responsible. This is their job. Because this is at least what they should be doing. They should be able to keep this information up to date. And if they can't, then we have a problem. So I appreciate, and I know that you guys have been communicating. I'm glad that we have established a task force. I'm glad of the willingness to make those changes, and I do look forward for the legislative changes and recommendations that we are going to look at pursuing as well. Thank you. Okay. I don't have any, and I see nobody's moved back there, so I'm assuming that nobody knows, but I do want to know before today is over with.
We do have a communications department, but I think
Who's over communication?
what,
Who's over communication?
from the very highest executive level, we have Amy Whitehead, and she's newer to her role. So she just recently, within the last couple of months, took that role. And then we have hired just in the last 2 weeks, I think, 2 additional staff from the executive level. And then we do have someone that helps us on child welfare specifically as well. But we would have to look at the website a little bit more and figure out if it's pulling in like hyperlinks and if that is what you're seeing, because we may not be able to filter that as well, but we'll definitely take a look and figure out why the information isn't current when you search.
Okay. Well, if I was trying to make a report, and I would think that if I typed in those words that it should have pulled up that information, which it did not. It did not pull up that information, but it pulled up this. Then that is a challenge and problematic. just for me. I'm a very novice tech person, so I mean I wouldn't know if this was perhaps coming from some other link, but it's on your website, and I'm trying to do a report. That would be a problem.
Yeah, I suspect that the majority of people that do visit our site are interested in information on how to report. And so I think from
Hold on for a second, because you're talking and you're not on.
sorry. But yeah, I
Sorry.
would really, we do need to look at it. It definitely is difficult. I am a mandatory reporter. I have made several mandatory reports in my career, and I agree it is difficult to navigate at times. So we can make some significant improvements, and we will look at that.
Again, I know because I served on finance, how much money was supposed to be going to IT, especially for this particular department. I want to know who is responsible and how much we are paying them, because somebody needs to really help me understand why this is not done. Not on you. I'm just saying. I need to understand. I remember those conversations from the finance hearing, and it was a lot of money. Okay. Thank you. All right. I'm move from there. And if there's no other questions for DCFS, I want to make sure that we have enough time to hear from our individuals who've come. Judge, why did you come? You just like magically appeared. I know, we called you.
I had to step out for another meeting over in Cleveland real quick.
Yes, please sit right there.
David Matlock, I'm the Secretary of the Department of Children and Family Services. We will have that information for you. I'm afraid I walked in kind of on the tail end of that, so Dr. Hook and others back here will help update me. A lot of money was spent on CWIS. That either I've heard $14 and $40 million, and we have a really robust process going on right now, led by Cody Cathy, to develop an integrated child welfare information system. Some of this relates to our Undersecretary's office. Some of this relates to which that project resides. Some of this relates to communications. Some of it relates to child welfare, but it all relates to me, Senator. And so I obviously share your concerns. That is not the only problematic information that has pulled up, and I've had to shut. Sometimes it is linking to something outside, and I've had to shut down those links because it was linking to stale information, which was not helpful. This could be internal, it could be external. Either way, it needs to be fixed one way or the other, and we'll get that information to you. But in terms of who's responsible, right now your answer is me, David Matlock. And so I would love to get that link from you. It would be helpful to me, but others may be able to share that as well.
I would be more than happy to do that. And thank you so much, Judge, Madam, Mr. Secretary, for coming to respond to that, because I mean,
It's a big deal.
you weren't here when we was hearing about all the tragic things that's what were happening, and the lack of communication, and we kept putting money to try to make this a little easier. So CWIS no longer has the contract.
It was blown up before I got here. We have started essentially from scratch.
Okay.
And
so
we're
who has the
building it
contract now?
in a different way. I can't give you the name of the third-party contractor. I'm familiar with our management team, and they can provide all that information, and we can meet formally or informally.
Okay, and I want to do that, because when I pull this up, if I am a mandatory reporter, and I'm telling you, I am very green to this, right? In terms of navigating the process, when I typed in those words, which was child abuse reporting.
On our search link on our site? Okay.
And then what came up was stuff that is dated more than a decade ago.
Correct. Not helpful.
And nothing that actually gives me the link of where I would need to go.
And you're an astute user. And so, all the populations we're serving aren't necessarily all.
Right.
So a couple of other lead comments, if I can, just a couple of things that are unrelated to that, if I can. I want to thank this force for the work that you are doing in 3 decades of working in the space of child welfare in one role or another. I have seen repeatedly how unaddressed childhood trauma, particularly sexual trauma, is a ticking time bomb for our populations. Two types of childhood abuse are particularly prone to be that sort of time bomb in terms of behavioral health, in terms of emotional health, and frankly, in terms of physical health. And that is exposure to domestic violence at a young age in the home where you can't do anything about it, and exposure to and victimization of sexual trauma as a small child. We know often it is females victims, but that's not exclusive, and we know that as well, of course. And if it is untreated, unaddressed, it is going to be a problem. And so your work to prevent that and to ameliorate it at the earliest stages is vital to all of the work that we are trying to do in terms of the welfare of our public and certainly in terms of child welfare. Another comment that I would want to make in terms of interacting with law enforcement now through the wonderful work of the Louisiana Chiefs, Municipal Law Enforcement Chiefs Association, every chief of police in the state of Louisiana has my cell number, my personal cell number. And if they call me, it will ring. It'll vibrate right this minute. So it is important. And I've called our hotline. I've had to, while secretary, in the last 12 months, I've had to call our hotline to report abuse. Changes were made pretty quickly after that happened, I will tell you, because we had some things, and it was a perfect storm of some things, but we made some changes. We've got a new vendor. I don't know how much that was gone into by Dr. Hook or others, but we're working to make it very agile and quick. It's problematic for me to hear that 45 minutes sitting on there for a law enforcement. Obviously, there is a special button to push if you're law enforcement. I will tell you, if you're the secretary, you use that button too after about your third call. But be that as it may, because that physicians and law enforcement, the folks who regularly, and frankly educators, the folks who have to regularly interact with this, they need to be, and also specialized knowledge. We can have a special trust of information comes from certain areas of expertise. And so, but it needs to be more agile. It's a challenge, and it's not just for Louisiana. Everyone is facing this. We do need more resources. We'll visit privately about that, Senator Barrow. I have specific workforce things that we would like to address. I need more people, particularly frontline people who actually serve where the rubber hits the road. But I mainly wanted to, and of course I wanted to say hi to Lacey, Miss Hadley. And the vital role of those CACs, and I watched it done so beautifully in Northwest Louisiana through the Gingerbread House. I was in Thibodaux yesterday visiting with potential for foster parents and working on standing up foster parent collaboratives, but also visiting with the leader of Hope, which is, I think, the CAC there. Others can speak to it better, but and they actually have pretty good coverage. There's another one not terribly far away from Tallulah, other than the fact that everything is terribly far from Tallulah. I mean, I'm sorry, I said Tallulah, I meant Bogalusa. I apologize, Bogalusa, yesterday. But a similar situation there. And then the availability of health care for children and for our biological parents of our children, all critical in those rural areas. That's a thing for you. You know, you represent a pretty urban district, and I really admire your courage, Senator, for standing up for those some of those other more challenging areas. Sorry to talk so much. I just wanted to thank you. This thankless work that you do, and I'm grateful for it. And the connections between law enforcement. I met with Colonel Hodges last week with our state police on this very topic, the interactions between law enforcement and DCFS. Dr. Hook, I believe, was in our meeting, and we are addressing that. Of course, our interactions are mostly not with law enforcement, except during times of mass evacuation, with state police except during mass evacuations. But state police are a wonderful neural network to be able to connect with your sheriffs and your local municipal law enforcement agencies. So it's a special work for us. I invite you reaching out to me. To my cell number's on my card, so I'm available. It's also on the little white sheet of paper, so y'all share that. And with your constituents, if you happen to be representing a Senate or representative district, when they call in, feel free to share that. Again,
Well,
I'm done.
thank you,
Questions?
Judge, Mr. Secretary, again, for being here. We appreciate that. Well, I really appreciate how much you're making yourself available to literally, seemingly anyone who has an issue. And we know how careful you have to be because you got to take care of yourself. Because I know your phone it would never literally stop ringing. And so I appreciate that. And I know that you're sincere about that. And I know that you're sincere about your commitment to the department and what you want to do for kids and families. And you have seen the other side before coming here. So you really totally get it, and I appreciate that. But again, I do want to visit with you about the website. I want to talk about, this information, how is this all done? And probably what I will do is look at all state websites because, again, this was something that came up quite often that we were looking at as we were looking at budgets, right? And we were looking at IT and all that stuff that we are putting into each department to make sure that they have the tools that they need so they can get things done in real time. But at the same time, I mean, this was very problematic for me. But I appreciate everything else that you're doing. I do look forward to us visiting and getting a little bit. Want to hear your budget issues. I know that you have concerns, so do I. I'm trying to make sure that we address those as well. With that said, I don't see any questions for you, Mr. Secretary. So I want to thank you for coming. And look, we'll be back in touch very soon. And so we're going to jump right into our two individuals who are here from the public who wants to speak.
Y'all eat lunch and stop and we talk about trauma. You got to hydrate, nutrition, movement. Dr. St. Germain, Dr. Hook, y'all know this stuff. Take breaks. Sorry to interject. Thank you.
Well, believe it or not, Mr. Secretary, I have already shared that with them, and they have lunch in the back. And I told them to feel free to kind of step away, and they can still listen as they're eating. All right, thank you. So we have Roger Williams and is it Jana?
Jana. Yes,
Jana Padre?
Padre.
I'm sorry. Okay. And who will go first?
I'll start.
Kind of bouncing back. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Good morning, esteemed members of the committee. My name is Major Roger Williams, and I'm an active duty member of the Louisiana Army National Guard. This is my wife, Dr. Jana Padre. She's a nurse anesthesiologist at a large teaching facility in New Orleans. Dr. St. Germain, I believe she actually took you as one of the electives, which actually helped us in our initial steps be on the right path. So we appreciate you and the work that you do. She has her doctorate in nursing practice. Together, we have two amazing little girls that are our absolute world. Today, however, I'm not here as a soldier. I'm here as a father and an anguished father who's fighting for change on behalf of my now 4-year-old daughter. On the day I'll never forget, I picked my daughter up from school. I took her straight to gymnastics, our normal Monday afternoon routine. When I helped her change into her leotard, I discovered a significant amount of blood in her underwear. Alarmed, I took a picture and I sent it to my wife to confirm if this was normal. Her response was immediate and clear. This was not normal. We gently asked our daughter what happened. She told us a boy in her class had hurt her by touching her energina. She also mentioned that an assistant teacher witnessed the incident and told the boy to stop touching her privates. But no further action was taken. Devastated, we immediately sought medical help at Children's Hospital in New Orleans. Sitting there trying to explain to my daughter that she had done nothing wrong was one of the most heartbreaking moments of my life. In the weeks that followed, my mental health would be equivalent to, if not worse, than my combat deployment to Iraq.
So I tried my best to keep my brave face on for my daughter, and I promised her no bobos would happen. We were just going to go to the doctor, let them see her bobo from school, and then we would be on our way. So while waiting for the exam, I collected random trinkets from the exam room, and she made a Forky like Toy Story. Okay, so we did that, and then she would cling to this little stick figure for 2 weeks as a comfort toy for her. So, just, imagine coaching your 3-year-old through a forensic photo of her privates. It's not pleasant. It's pretty heartbreaking. So, keeping my face, but in my mind, I'm screaming because I did all the right things, in undergrad school at LSU HSC. I took the forensics class. I did darkness to light. I did those things. I thought I did everything right. So ultimately, we went to Children's Hospital, and then we went to the Audrey Hepburn Center in New Orleans afterwards. I originally had gone there during clinicals and sat in with Ann Troy, and I watched her do a forensic interview, and I was amazed back then, but never in a million years did I think I would visit it as a parent of a child who had to go there. So why we're here is we felt like a system failed us. So I've been sitting here attentively listening to everyone give their discussions of how they're preventing this, but I can tell you as a consumer how it's been for us, okay, as parents. So after her assault, we turned to these very systems designed to protect our children, right, our most prized possession in life. And so we went to JPSO. We'll say immediately we contacted the school, okay. From there, we contacted Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Department. And they initially refused to investigate. They didn't want to do anything about it. They said the boy was the same age, nothing's wrong. So nobody got in touch with us from JPSO. So from there, we turned to DCFS. DCFS said, JPSO said turn to DCFS and the school for any actions to be taken. So then we turned to DCFS, and it was declared that the law enforcement had that issue and that we need to go back to JPSO. And they continued to resist involvement, and they cited that the children's age as a barrier, as in the same age. Since there is not a greater than 2-year age difference between the boy who touched my daughter.
Who said that?
It was the detective. So because they're under the age of 10, to our understanding, there's nobody to charge legally. So we were never, we asked multiple times to be given to the SVU unit. We got, after many phone calls over a few weeks, we finally got assigned a detective from the school resource department.
But when we went to the Audrey Hepburn Center, JPSO didn't show up. We called them, we requested them to appear. They didn't come. Nobody from JPSO came. So we were sitting there without any law enforcement at the Child Advocacy Center. So from there, like we said, I notified the school. They would not meet with us for 7 days. Nothing from the school.
The school would not meet?
The school would not meet with us. Now, the caveat to this situation is that our children, us being from New Orleans, went to private school. So we'll go further into it, but there's not as much oversight because it is a private school. And there are some very large loopholes that we have discovered the more that we've gone down this rabbit hole trying to find answers for our child. So they met with us 7 days after their investigation, and they admittedly, the 2 administrators responsible for the investigation are untrained and have never dealt with this before at their school, okay? So we were told that these were serious allegations and that they were not found to be credible, okay? The footage that they reviewed were cameras outside of the school. They have no cameras within the school to review it, okay? So we asked did you notify the boy's family? Because, like everyone's agreed here, we want to make sure that that child is safe as well, because it's typically a learned behavior. And they said that they refused to tell his family because it would be devastating if it wasn't true. Okay? So, meanwhile, we're sitting there dumbfounded. How can it be devastating to his family? What about our family? What about my 3-year-old at the time, right? She's stuck at home. She no longer can go to school and see her friends. And at some point, I have to keep telling her, but it's not your fault. You did the right thing in coming to us and telling us the truth, and we appreciate that. But how is a child going to perceive that? So, anyways, the most egregious thing, how we feel afterwards as consumers, is by the Department of Education. So, according to their interpretation of Bulletin 137, schools like the one that my daughter attended, which was private school, has a loophole that if children that turn 3 by September 30th, they're not actually required to be licensed. So you can have a private school that goes from 10 weeks through middle school. And if they're 2 and unders, they can be licensed. However, starting at 3, they can be unlicensed. And if they are unlicensed, then they don't have to follow the Department of Education's guidelines.
In Bulletin 137. So they're not required to have a license as long as all the kids, they are able to partition off certain sections of the school. And that is something I did bring up with the Department of Education. Nowhere in the law does it say that specific portions of the school can be broken up. It says in the law that if you service, my interpretation of it, if you service kids that are under 2 years old, then you shall have a license and you don't qualify for the exemption. However, the Department of Education, when we contacted them, they stated that because they are not required to have a license, that they don't have jurisdiction and that they can't cite the school, that they won't do an investigation. So the follow-up question was, who does have jurisdiction? No one's been able to tell me who has jurisdiction, who can cite the school. There's policy set out in Bulletin 137 that were not followed, admittedly, from the school. And there's no violations. There's no one that's gone in to look, and there's frankly been nothing that's changed.
So how is that acceptable, ultimately? How can a school that takes care of vulnerable children, right, preschool, my daughter was 3, how is no one held responsible? Nobody's accountable. Everybody's pointing fingers at each other. JPSO points to DCFS, DCFS points to the school, law enforcement. Then we go to the Department of Education. They won't do anything. The school's never been cited. The boy never missed 1 day of school. I immediately pulled my daughter out. We had to fly my father-in-law down from New York City to watch my kids, and they couldn't go to school until we found a new school almost half a year later. So from there, ultimately, who is responsible for holding all schools accountable for child safety? Whether it is ratios, whether it is a bathroom policy where they can't go to the bathroom by themselves, that someone's there outside the door, right? Having dedicated age bathrooms. There's so much stuff that's there that they didn't have to follow because this loophole allowed it. And then we're just kind of left. So who's accountable? That's all.
The lasting impact. This situation was entirely avoidable. If the school had followed the basic safety practices that's already delineated in Bulletin 137, such as maintaining proper student-to-teacher ratios for student safety, ensuring supervision during bathroom breaks, or implementing clear reporting procedures, my daughter's trauma could have been prevented. Today, my daughter cannot attend school for more than 4 hours a day without an additional aid that's paid by our expense. She's undergoing therapy to cope with trauma and the abrupt changes she experienced consequently. But what about the families who don't have the resources my wife and I have? What about their children? What about the single parent forced to choose between paying for therapy or paying for bills? What about the children failed by a broken system, a government which has allowed these loopholes for schools, such schools that have since become corporations? corporations that put profits ahead of my child, your grandchildren's safety for their bottom line. You could just as easily be in my position speaking in front of this committee right now. We don't need your thoughts and prayers. We need your help. We need your minds for change. I stand before you today as a father advocating for his child, not as just a father advocating for his child, but as a voice for all families who have been failed by the lack of accountability and oversight in Louisiana's educational and child protective systems. We need immediate action to close the loopholes in Bulletin 137 that allowed schools to operate without a license or proper oversight, mandate student-to-teacher ratios, supervision policies, and reporting protocols for all institutions caring for young children, require training for educators and administrators in handling allegations of sexual misconduct, regardless of children's age, establish clear, enforceable consequences for schools and agencies that fail to respond appropriately to allegations of abuse. This isn't just about my daughter. It's about ensuring no child suffers like she did. It's about creating a system that prioritizes accountability, transparency, and most importantly, the safety of our children. I implore you to act with urgency. Louisiana's children deserve better. My daughter deserves better. Thank you for your time and kind consideration. Thank you for allowing me to share our story. I'm happy to answer any questions or provide additional information to help guide the important changes we desperately need here in the state of Louisiana.
Thank you. I want to thank both of you for being here today. Thank you for your courage. I am sorry that your baby went through that. I tell you. So I'm going to turn to the attorneys because I want to make sure I understood. So children at the same school, so this is a private school. That's number one, right? Okay. So kids 2 and under are under a license and they have the certification process. But if the kids are 3 and older, they don't have to.
Correct. They're not required.
Currently. Can y'all help me look into that? Because I don't understand. So they are not held to the same standard. And I know that there are differences with private school and public schools, etc. But we have no process there's nothing in place.
To my understanding, and after speaking to the Department of Education as well multiple times, there is no standards, and no one could point me to who has, is a regulating body for kids that turn 3 after September 30th. And again, in the law, I didn't see anything in there that states a school that is one entity, one school on one campus with the same administrators, with the same LLC, with the same principal. Doesn't say anywhere in there in the law that you can partition certain sections of the school off. Only the 2s and unders are required. Again, it's unfathomable, and that's why we're here today.
To put it into examples, so if the 2s and unders are licensed and there's oversight, what they would do is, let's say a teacher called in sick and the ratio is now no longer being met. They would take the assistant teachers from the 3s and the 4s, and they would pull the assistant to meet that licensed ratio that was required for 2s and unders, knowing that there were not enough teachers and assistants for a classroom because they didn't have to meet that standard.
For the 3s and older. So at times, my daughter's class would be left with 1 teacher to up to 16 kids for an entire day.
So if one child at 3 years old had to use a restroom, nobody would watch them. They would run out the room, use the bathroom, nobody would watch them. And they didn't have a dedicated bathroom for that age.
So, and the other thing that really gets me is the fact, I think you said the law enforcement said there was nobody to hold accountable.
Right. So because at the time we don't believe or we don't know that any adults were involved, but because the children is under the age of 10, and sir, maybe you can put some more insight to this, but from what I was told was because the children are under the age of 10, there's no 2-year age difference. There's nobody to charge.
Since there wasn't a power struggle there because the boy wasn't greater than 2 years old, that they said there was no criminality component and that, JPSO could not get involved. And then, basically nobody wants to take responsibility. Nobody said that there was neglect by the facility, neglect by a teacher. Nothing has been done. Nothing has changed.
And this happened in March of last year. We're still fighting.
Yeah, we've been talked down to by different people of some organizations, which I won't say because they're not here to speak for themselves. But we've been talked down to that we can't make you understand the law, is what we've been told. They said that since the school was not licensed, it would be as if they would go after a grocery store, like we were asking them to go after.
I know they did not make that comparison. Please don't tell me that.
Ma'am, I got all the receipts.
Yes, so that's our personal experience as consumers to the system, unfortunately.
Okay. Mr. Sanjay, you want? Let me do the ad because I also have doctors. The doctors, and then I'm gonna bring you on Dr. St. Germain. I'm sorry. So what happened here? Okay, here we go.
All right. So I know from the from law enforcement end, I don't know where this 2-year age gap thing, that's a sex crime description. But overall, under the age of 10, you can't make an arrest. It's under the age of culpability. So we wouldn't be able to move forward with a case. I think that's what they were, I don't know how they explained it to you.
That's essentially what it was.
But I think that's, go ahead.
Question is, I think it's twofold. Why didn't the school do the right thing?
That's number one.
Number one, and separate the children. Well, they did. There were so many failures, systemic, but also, why wasn't it investigated if that other child was okay?
That was our question that we asked
Like,
multiple different agencies.
How did that child know to do that?
That was a question that we asked multiple agencies, and no one has done anything.
To my understanding, the parents were not informed by the school. The parents were informed when the JPSO pulled them out of carpool picking up their child from school. That's when they first found out about it. And that was
2 weeks later.
Later, yes.
So pulling them out of carpool, not only that, is now like, where is the privacy for your child and the other child if that child is also being abused?
There's many questions I have,
Yes.
and I'm still dumbfounded.
That's why we
We've tried
find
everything.
ourselves here today before this committee, because there was so many systematic failures at all levels of this and basic levels of accountability and child safety procedures that haven't been followed. So, today, I'm thankful that you guys are doing this and giving us this opportunity to come and address this committee. But clearly, there are things that fall through the cracks, and these are some easy fixes. Bulletin 137, or, if the Department of Education wanted to look at that in a different way, they could do something. So, at least to my understanding, again, we've asked for them to give us why they're not required to have a license on paper, citing Title 17 and Bulletin 137, and we've yet to receive any of that.
Are you finished? Thank you so much, Ms. Wascom. You're absolutely correct. I'm just really just taken back by how the school is handled, and I'm glad that your baby, and I'm keep calling her that because she still is. It's okay, and I'll say okay loosely, but she has your support. I'm thinking about other kids and other parents who've been through this, and if they have talked to you in that manner, then I can only imagine how they may have spoken to other parents and made them feel, and some of them just didn't have the wherewithal or the bandwidth to do the fight. And now what's happening to those babies who, because I'm still stuck at there was no responsibility. I understand what the law says, but where were the teachers? There was responsibility, and then the parents. They were never even looped in, and according to what you said, until the police told them.
14 days later.
Wow, that is so unacceptable. Dr. St. Germain.
Hey, y'all, so good to see you. Personal things make me very emotional, so if I can step back a minute. 20 years ago, we did one heck of a job to get daycares under licensing, and we've closed that gap. I had no idea, but I see the dollar signs coming at these schools to bring in younger and younger kids and then piece it together. It's wrong. You are correct. We have to do better for our kids. And that's why we are fighting and continue to fight for every avenue, entity, person that is in charge of children. This just takes me back more than 20 years to say, oh my gosh, what has happened to our education system? That was always our stronghold. We knew that they would do the right thing. And I can tell you every day, I can name schools. I can name schools all over Jefferson Parish that failed to report, failed parents, failed kids, failed teachers that report to the higher-ups. And some have left schools. So we have a really huge task to protect all the other kids. But here's my other thing is, when the heck are we going to stop dropping the ball? When JPSO, and I know exactly who you're talking about because I deal with him too, and he just infuriates me. You can't say, okay, well, go over here or go over here. It's their issue. They clearly know it's not a DCFS issue because that's in-home. That is not a school. But where is the counseling, the support, the help for kids and families? It just, you got the spin around. And when are we going to stop this? As a group, we have that opportunity. And it just, again, just knocked me back 20 years that we fought so hard for licensing for daycares, and now schools can go unlicensed.
Yeah.
What is that? Where is that accountability? And I tell you, I don't know. Maybe I need to go down here to Captain Sanji, because if my JPSO will not go after the school personnel, I need someone who will. And I don't know who that needs to be. But like you said, maybe it's at the point somebody has got to understand that this is serious. I mean, I remember when the first nurse got arrested for not drawing blood alcohols on somebody when law enforcement requested. And that woke up the entire community. So what is it going to be coming from us that will keep these things from happening? I had no idea about a loophole. I had no idea that they weren't licensed. So you've really educated me today on what are those loopholes. And
It's been a very eye-opening.
being a mother of a child with special needs, that's a whole different story when we're talking about education standards in the private schools. We won't get into. But you're right. And what the other gentleman said is when a child is affected, they're affected for life.
Yeah, that was the secretary. I'm like you. I'm trying to.
And kind of your reaction is what we've gotten the whole time. We've gotten a lot of thoughts and prayers. But it's time for action.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was listening about children who aren't quite believed, right? And it's not just the child that's not believed, but parents as well. And then you do what's best for the child's, if no one ultimately cares, why am I going to, so let's say in the first 2 weeks, JPSO did not want to investigate, right? Typically, from my understanding of literature for child psychology in these situations, you don't keep re-traumatizing them by repeated, interviews. So at some point, it's, well, you had your chance 2 weeks ago, and my child's starting to move past this. Am I going to keep exposing her, or are we just going to pretend that her friend was mean to her and gave her a bobo, and we're going to move on from it, and we're not going to make it taboo like you and I feel that it's taboo, right? It's embarrassing to have to admit that your child was sexually assaulted at a private school that you thought was one of the best in the city. I did my research as to these private schools, and I can't speak for the rest of Louisiana, but in New Orleans, it's pretty important. If your child at that age, they can't test in to an academy for them to have a decent education and for you to want the best for your child and for their future, right? You send them to private school, not thinking that after 2 years old, nobody cares about their protection at school.
That's not true. We do. And we're going to help some other folks, even if we're going to help some other folks to care too. So, and I know they can hear us, and I know that they're probably listening, the Department of Education, so they know that we'll be coming, because I have to understand, because I can't really comprehend what I've heard. I've heard it, and I understand it, but I don't understand how that's happening. Who is that peeping behind? You're not from DOE? No. Okay. Yeah. Your hair just keep coming around. I was just wondering. Okay. Okay. And we're not just offering prayers.
We appreciate you, Senator.
Yeah. So we thank you for your testimony. Captain, you want to say something? I just feel like because we need help to understand this whole process. We just, and we can't let it stay here though. We just got to figure out what's happening.
I think it should. I mean, I'd have to look and see everything that JPSO said and didn't do, apparently, and everything. So it's hard for me. I don't want to step on their feet, I guess, because I don't know where they were coming from, and everything. I mean, I think there's a way to handle these type of situations better than this, let's say.
Absolutely. I would hope that, like Dr. St. Germain said, we can't keep dropping the ball. And this is really, I have to tell you, this task force has opened up so many different things I was not really expecting. I have to say that, because there's just been some things that I personally thought, let me just say that, I thought were in place and perhaps working. I knew that we had gaps. I knew that we had some things we needed to address, but there's been way more than I expected. And maybe one of the good things, I guess I could say, Ms. Hadley, is the fact that we have it so that we can address them, but it's been a lot more than I anticipated. But I do want to thank y'all for coming, and don't move, because there's two more people who want to ask a question or make a comment. Ms. Hadley.
I know you mentioned that you took her to Audrey Hepburn.
Mm-hmm.
Was that just for a forensic exam, or was there an interview conducted as well?
There was an interview conducted as well. It was
How long after?
Well, initially they wanted it, I think it was something like 2 weeks after.
2 weeks after.
But we were able to, I protested a little bit, and we were able to get it down to about a week.
Which is amazing. The fact, but even with y'all's background and knowledge, y'all knew to do that. Some wouldn't. Which I'm glad that you advocated the way y'all did. And I'm trying to remain professional and not get emotional, because just with you guys and the way y'all are reacting and y'all's research, I just only feel the love even more. But it brings me just another question as far as policy or protocol for law enforcement. And I know you can't speak for all of them, and I don't even know if you need to even respond or not, but this is just more of just a question up in the air. I know certain agencies respond differently to this. We've had children interviewed where it was child on child and with no known suspect. And it was just them two interacting, but we still proceeded to do a safety check interview, one with what we would say our victim, and then one which we would lightly call our suspect, because we know the laws that under the age of 10 they can't be held culpable. We understand that, but with the questions that have already been arisen, where did this child learn that from? And that's the exploratory we want to understand and check in with them. And a lot of the times with especially that age, they may not even say a thing. And we understand that, but we don't know. We don't want to assume. We always want to try and just see what comes out of this. And then even with their age of coming to a CAC, we want them to be interviewed because it opens up all those free resources. And I know it's even more challenging for their age because a lot of counselors, they're too young to be counseled, which understandable developmentally, but I know there's a lot more mainstream things like child play therapy, which at that age, they like to communicate through play. So it's not impossible, but it makes more barriers. And so I just wanted to shed light on just policy as far as law enforcement. What is it like across the board when it is that age, 5 and under, and it's done with each other? Some of them, I know some of our law enforcement would still do those forensic interviews. And then I know at those younger ages it needs to be done sooner, which
But
I'm
what
glad
about the
y'all
people
did.
that are supposed to be supervising those kids? At that age especially. Again, no one's ever gotten involved. They made a calculated decision to, have their own internal guidelines, pull teachers from a unlicensed portion of the school to the licensed portion to meet ratios, which left other kids vulnerable.
Which you bring up that exact point. Though when the children are brought to the CAC with an unknown suspect, that doesn't mean we stop there after the interviews. Let's kind of look into and assess what happened at the school. I hear exactly what you're saying, and why couldn't that go
and
those
why
proper
didn't
steps?
because maybe the JPSO could have, maybe there was some child endangerment there, maybe there was some form of accountability that somewhere in this line could have been given. And like someone stated earlier, I believe it was the nurse draw, right? If you if somebody was arrested for not drawing blood, if an administrative or a school had some accountability, I think that would send a very clear message across the state of Louisiana that if you choose profit over child safety, then there are consequences for you and your organization. And again, no one's ever approached us. No one's even looked into if there is child endangerment there. Clearly, there was a calculated decision. Again, a lot of different people could have made this school accountable, but everyone is choosing to point fingers and say it's this person's problem, it's this person's problem. Oh, we don't have jurisdiction because we don't require them to have a license. They're under 10, don't want to get involved. There's avenues that there could be accountability and a message could be sent. However, we have yet to find somebody to, take up this fight with us for change and accountability.
Something you said, and you said that it just came to me, an endangerment. First, so the other child that we don't know much about, but his parents were not even made aware until the police told him, no one didn't think that was abnormal.
People thought it was abnormal, but nobody did anything.
Or they didn't want to believe our child.
But not enough to look further into that situation, because something tells me, I don't know for sure, maybe something is happening to that child, because how does that just happen?
Which it gets tricky because at that age, under the age of 10, the parents don't have to participate if they do not want to. So even if law enforcement does approach both families, victim and, we're just going to say because of the age, victim and victim. Obviously, I know they would still do their due diligence and do what they need to do for their daughter. That other family does not have to participate if they do not want to. which they still could move forward on their end and do what they need to do, but the family on the other side doesn't have to be involved. They can be reluctant and push back if they choose to do so to their own prerogative.
Okay, Amanda, Christina, we have some work to do because I'm still struggling with that. Because what if that child is being abused, right?
Yeah, we can't make them come to a CAC.
But how do we even check to make sure that child's okay?
We try to approach them in that way.
Oh, God,
A
help me.
victim-centered
Okay.
approach, if we can.
But just saying this, as far as the Audrey Hepburn Center in New Orleans, it is amazing. It really is. It was rather empty.
I've heard a lot of wonderful things about it.
It is.
So help me keep that level of confidence.
It is amazing. It's definitely worth every penny of funding that you would
Okay.
provide them. And it made a fairly terrible situation easier, if you can call it that way. But, you know, unfortunately, what we were able to see one other patient or child there at the center, and she looked like a shell. And that's heartbreaking because we have, you know, we are probably in a different situation and we can provide our child other resources. But I am highly doubtful that this child, if given the same situation, had the same resources in place to help them from future, you know, outcomes from what had happened. You know, we've been fortunate, right? If we need additional money, right? I took a travel contract away from my family to make double the income to afford my family therapy, right? Who can do that? How can a working mom that does minimum wage with more than one child, who can afford that? Who can afford $150 an hour for therapy? Nobody. Health insurance doesn't want to cover it. There's, you know, I understand that there were free resources, but typically my child was too young, right? And then additionally, they're not trauma trained. So we're kind of just left in this limbo, this weird limbo, which is now our new normal. This is our new normal, and I've accepted it. But, you know, I want to see something positive come from our situation. That's all, you know, whether it is your time today, which is amazing, and I appreciate it. If change occurs, fantastic. I will feel so much better about this situation than I do currently. But, you know, I appreciate all your time. Okay.
Thank you. Dr. St. Germain?
I just wanted to say, our weakest link that we've identified is human error and the failure to act and protect. So is there some process that parents can push that button without waiting on law enforcement or DCFS? Can they not come to a CAC, or what is that safety net that can be triggered automatically? I don't know what that answer is, but that's what I'm thinking from a school standpoint, from a parent standpoint, from a child standpoint. Who is going to listen to them? And at least let an MDT, because what we said, CACs work great, so do MDTs. So why not MDTs gather that information, and then more brains are better? I almost think that AI would be able to help us kind of navigate what is out there. What do other states do? What do, you know, we're just going to add that in.
Well, I'm definitely asking our staff to assist us with this. I have a lot of concerns. Something you said, Mr. Williams, that I'm thinking as well, is charging, you know, actually having charges, you know, looking in terms of when there has been something that occurs to this magnitude in terms of the procedural things that happen, and making sure that whoever is the owner have some level of responsibility in addition, because that would make them, going back to something you said, Captain Sonnier, about hiring the right people, would make people be a little bit more cognitive about folks, because sometimes, you know, just some of the things that I've heard you guys have experienced and gone through, some of that, the level of insensitivity And you would think if they are educators working with children, that would come with that particular position. But it seemed like it was just completely missing. I mean, just, and maybe it went back to who's going to be responsible. I don't want it to follow me. I'm not quite sure. But if we had something that ties to who owns it, I think there may be also something that leads to a different level of responsibility and accountability. And that's something I'm going to be looking at too, in terms of how we can tie that together. But we just need to look at the law, because the law is that's broke.
And I just want to make it clear as well, we're not upset at the boy, right? Like, he doesn't know any better. He's a child, right? We just want to make sure he's safe. But, we are upset because at some point you have to find where to direct these feelings at. It would ultimately, I feel like the school chose their bottom line ahead of my child's safety. So what can we do to make these schools accountable and make sure that their kids are safe, and not do a lean Six Sigma on how can we make it the cheapest way to run this school to increase our profit margins? It should be, what is the safest thing to facilitate our children's learning in a safe environment? That's what it should ultimately come down to.
If you're in education to make money, it's the wrong line of work. And when you have corporations coming in and buying up schools, trying to make them as profitable as possible, there's clearly going to be issues like this arise, because it's not the cheapest to follow the bare minimum guidelines that the state has set forth in Bulletin 137.
Well, I think that you brought up a very good point that I want to take a look at that. And again, I don't know if I feel that the child is safe. I don't know if I feel that he's safe. I don't know if I am convinced that he's safe. Yeah. And no one seemed to really care if he was. But thank you for your testimony. I think I did capture everybody. Appreciate it. Okay, we have one more person, and I know. Look, guys, y'all are welcome to go get something to eat. You can still watch us while you eat in the ante room. You can still watch everything, and you can run out like I normally do and press my button if you have a question. Richard. The Cody. Oh, so he had to leave?
He's outside. He asked me just to come and respectfully ask to reserve for next meeting.
Okay.
And I know I was here last meeting and I reserved my right. I would like to reserve my right again because my story kind of coincides with the bill that he would like to pass that he wants to speak to you guys about.
So what I may do next meeting is I may actually take our public testimony first. I had somebody who was watching us who wanted to be here today who could not be here because of something with the Entergy, I guess that has some issue going on her street with Entergy, and she could not get out. But she wants to talk about the referral system as it relates with CACs and having to have a file number when coming to see. I guess, when you have a complaint, then you have to have a file number from the police department as a part of the referral. Yeah. So anyway, so what I may do next time, I think that's what I am going to do, is hear from the public first, so that we can hear what is happening and making sure that y'all have enough time to speak, and then we'll get into the issue. So we'll have one more meeting before the legislative session start. We do have recommendations as it relates to what we are looking at in terms of legislative items. It looked like this may be expanding a little bit, but I know my take and what I was going to propose and that we was going to kind of put together was definitely looking at the language, which it seems like there is a consensus between what you propose, Ms. Wascom, and with the department, that we will look at, making those changes and doing what was necessary. I don't know if anyone would have any objection to that, but we can see what that will look like, and we can make that proposal at the next meeting, make sure that the task force is on board. And then, help me out, Christine, what was the second thing? It was two that we did agree on that I think that we could actually move forward with. That last testimony, I'm like, between this meeting and last meeting, at the end, it's been just a lot.
I'll check with Amanda when she gets back in.
Okay.
I know the language was by far the thing at the very first meeting that we all agreed that we could do. And I think we're also going to try to compile a list for you on the things that don't necessarily need legislation, that can be done by rulemaking and through administrative actions.
Okay, and I want to say maybe it has something to do with the correlation between the CACs and law enforcement, maybe the communication. Amanda's walking up. I was talking about the two recommendations that we had on yesterday. I know that we talked about the language being one, and what's the other one? The communications between maybe the departments in terms of how the reporting was done.
The two recommendations we have so far, I think it was the language and the updating on the website to make it easier to report. We have talked about that we need to figure out a way to better facilitate communication between the departments, but I don't know that we've landed on a
What that looks
recommendation
like?
outside. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You have another one to add? Hold on for a second. Okay.
I think the biggest focus that I would like to take on as a task force is just the whenever DCFS receives a report that they do not accept but forward to law enforcement, that there's that lag that I'm deeply concerned about. And we had a case at our CAC recently where there was numerous reports to DCFS starting back in July and August, and then it finally got forwarded to law enforcement at the end of November. And so there's specific cases I have in mind where there's that huge gap and lull, and then how are we following up if they've received it? Are we doing it only by fax? Are we only doing it by email? Are we contacting the local law enforcement when forwarding these cases? That was a big focus I was concerned about in the last meeting.
So have y'all been in communication to come up with what maybe that could look like, those
not
agencies?
started
Okay.
That. What I would like to connect with DCFS to how we can better streamline that. Forwarding non-accepted cases, which I understand when they're not accepted, that's not the issue. It's just how we can fast track those non-accepted cases to law enforcement, because it still may be criminal and still needs to be addressed immediately. Just may not fit DCFS welfare investigation concerns.
Okay. Well, I would like to see if we can kind of figure out a way of how we do streamline, I guess, that communication process. But as we are looking at items that we are going to take on for this upcoming legislative session, which starts in April, I know that we did talk about and some of that is going to require legislation to look at the language. And then the other part was, talking about the website, which that should not require legislation. That should be something that they are able to act on immediately. And then the
what
community.
that is legislation. I have no idea what fits. Can that be administrative? I have no idea.
Hold on.
No, for whenever DCFS receives cases that they do not accept, and then they forward it to law enforcement.
Yeah, that would be internally. We can work on a process for that. That would not require any kind of legislation unless there was an issue with law enforcement receiving that from us. That might require some legislation.
The last meeting, what was mentioned that there was MOUs signed differently as to how law enforcement wanted to accept these cases. So it's different across the board, how it's received.
Yeah, and right now the policy that we have, which we are looking at, is that each of the local offices do have their direct, MOU or agreement with the law enforcement agency. And so that would, if we were going to make a change there, because law enforcement would also be involved, I don't know, that may be something that would require legislation, but we also have been meeting with law enforcement. We met with the state police last week, and we're working on really trying to find better ways for us to communicate just all across the state, and they've helped facilitate some of those conversations as well.
And I mean, I know state police is great, but I would love to get some of the local sheriffs and police
Yeah, so
departments
they're
as well.
even helping us to get some
Okay.
communication and giving us some contact information, and then of course we're taking it from there. But we are working to better communicate with them.
And I'm happy to help on the northwest.
And while
north
we're
side.
like exploring it, I think if we do discover that there's something that would need some legislative action, then we would bring it back to the task force.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
But if it does not require legislative oversight or legislative action, you guys are just going to go ahead and implement it, and you guys will let us know that you have implemented that? Okay, okay, great. All right. Mr. Dakota, attorney, thank you so much. I see you come in, and I've heard that you want to maybe hold your comments until next meeting, but please have a seat and say what you would like to say. I'm sorry that we went over so long.
Right. Would it be better to do it next time?
If it's going to be long, because first of all, I'm trying to. They are now texting me about the other meeting.
I understand, and I
But-
think it would work out better if I just did last time.
Yes, and what I'm gonna do next time is I'm gonna take actually the public testimony first.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's fine. Appreciate
But
it.
I hate that you sat here all day.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I have no complaint.
Is there anything that you want to say briefly?
Just real briefly, and I think this is something for the committee to consider, and I very much appreciate Ms. Wescom's statements because it piggybacks on that, and that is for a variety of reasons I can go into in detail next time. It is absolutely imperative for DCFS to be statutorily precluded from influencing child custody cases in family court. I think DCFS has an absolute appropriate role in child needed care cases, but what happens because of the dynamics in child custody cases involving sexual abuse being so different, and the forces of what's called DARVO, the strategy of very powerful abusive parents who have a lot to lose, who deflect, attack, and then reverse the abuser and the victim. So they become the victim when they're really the abuser, and there's a lot of domestic violence involved. The caseworkers who are thrust into these cases are over their heads, and the pressure that is exerted upon the department by these very aggressive, very powerful, often very wealthy, abusive parents and their attorneys. DCFS, it's a dynamic they're not used to, and cases are invalidated, or the mothers make it up, and then they go into family court. They don't even go into court. This information gets to the family court judge, who uses that, nothing to see here from the department, as an excuse to ignore or all the evidence of abuse that's actually presented in court, or to simply not listen to it and shut it down. So consequently, and this is obviously an unintentional consequence, because DCFS is involved in child custody cases where there's sexual abuse or physical abuse, and because their investigations are inadequate or poorly done, not for any reason other than the nature and the dynamics of those cases, DCFS is actually facilitating the placement of sexually abused children with their abusive parents. And I tell you this from doing these cases since 1974, I've done these cases in 46 states. I've gotten 3 Lifetime Achievement Awards for my work. I've written, as you know, Senator, a lot of legislation. We crafted in 2018 the best child custody statute in the country, Article 134 of the Civil Code. A1 says the primary consideration for awarding child custody is the potential for the child to be abused. But we see time and time again, it's heartbreaking, and I've seen this in 46 years of practicing law as a special assistant DA in 19 parishes. I was an attorney. I started the program for DCFS back in 1981 to reform the foster care system and free kids for adoption. I was a special assistant DA in 19 parishes. It is heartbreaking to see what happens in family court cases, as Ms. Wescombe pointed out, and this is a problem all over the country, where kids are not being protected because the judge hears DCFS said it was invalid, or they didn't do anything, or the police didn't make any arrests, so it didn't happen, which is not what that means, but it undermines the protection of kids. And so I think there's a statute that we had that was being considered last session that almost passed, that I think we need to narrow down, that would specifically limit DCFS's role in custody cases. I know Judge Ritchie, I think, was working on that effort with me as well, and it's something we can talk about more at the next hearing.
Okay. Certainly, we definitely want to go back and revisit some of those things. And when you talked about, potentially some of those things that have happened, and again, we did do that legislation in 2018, but some of the things that we still need to, because as you can see, and you do see, and if you listen today, we still have like a lot of too many glaring holes, too many things that are still falling through the crack. So please come back next month. We're going to do it in February, and then we're going to start preparing our report. Our report is actually due, I think, at the end of this. No, it's
End of February.
Yeah. But we're going to kind of ask for the forgiveness because we're going to give it to them by the end of next month in terms of our recommendation for this particular year. But again, we have a lot to cover. But next month, I want you guys to come and we're going to have you heard first. And then we'll hear from everything else that we have.
I'll have some proposed legislation I'll get to you in advance.
Okay,
as
great.
well.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, thank you. Okay. All right, everyone, I think that is it. Dr. Hook, your button is on. I'm sorry.
I didn't have a question. I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Okay.
Might be from the previous comment, I think.
Okay, all right. So with that said, I will move that we adjourn. We will, well, wait a minute. Let me look at this. Next meeting today is Wednesday. I think we decided the Wednesday is good. Is this the second Wednesday? Is next month the second Wednesday good? That's the 12th? Will that work for everyone? Same time, same place? Okay, sound like a winner. I see a lot of head shaking saying yes. I don't see no no's. Okay. February 12th at 10 a.m. And the room may be different, but we will be here at the Capitol. All right. I move that we adjourn. Thank you so very much to everyone. Have a good afternoon, and I appreciate your patience.